Hey guys, tonight we're plunging straight into the absolute deep freeze of history, the kind that burns your nose hairs and makes your eyebrows frost just from opening the door. Welcome to the American frontier, late 1700s, maybe early 1800s. No phones, no heat, no Gore-Tex jackets. Just you, some handmade tools, a cabin you barely finished before the snow started falling, and 6 months of bone-snapping winter ahead. Yeah, you probably won't survive this, but let's pretend you might. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I don't want to take up space in your feed unless I've earned it. Also, where are you watching from, and what time is it? I like knowing who I'm freezing to death with. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel it before you see it. The crispness in the morning air that wasn't there yesterday. The way the damp smell of the woods sharpens, and your breath stays visible a little too long. The animals are quieter. Even the trees seem to be bracing. You glance up at the sky, and sure enough, steel grey clouds, and then it begins. The first snow falls early this year, catching you off guard. It starts light, a sugar dusting on the roof of your log cabin. By nightfall it's heavier, flakes as big as thumbprints, slow and relentless. By morning everything's under a cold white blanket. You should have had another week or two to finish patching the north wall. You didn't. You hear the wind before it hits the cabin, whistling down from the mountains like it knows where you live. A blast slams into the wall with enough force to rattle the shutters. You shove more moss into the gaps between the logs and try not to think about how thin the wood is. You didn't have the time or manpower to cut proper boards. This place is barely holding together. You think of the neighbour up the valley who tried to sleep in a sod house last winter and didn't make it to spring. One night he just stopped waking up. Inside, the hearth crackles, but it's not enough. The fire only warms the centre of the room. The corners are already frosting. You can see your breath even when you're standing right next to the stove. You shove more logs into the firebox. You can't afford to run out of wood. A lot of settlers didn't make it through the first winter. Not because they didn't work hard, but because they didn't understand just how hard winter works against you. It's not just cold, it's a siege of time, of isolation, of limited food and withering morale. You weren't raised out here. You've never done this before. The sun barely rises, and when it does, it gives off more shadow than heat. You throw on another coat, scratchy wool with mismatched buttons, and slip out to check the barn. You hold your breath against the wind as it whips your scarf sideways and bites your cheeks raw. The snow is thigh-deep and climbing. You trudge through it like it's wet concrete. Somewhere under this white mess are tools you forgot to bring in. That's on you. The animals are skittish. Your old mule snorts and shifts in his stall, spooked by the sudden drop in temperature. The chickens refuse to leave the nesting boxes, and there's a wild set of prints around the barn, big, clawed, and too close for comfort. You note them quietly. You'll deal with that later. Back in the cabin, you double-check the pantry, beans, salt pork, a little cornmeal. You grind some coffee by hand just for the smell, and use the last of the molasses to sweeten it. Your fingers are already stiff. You consider how many months you have to stretch the supplies. The nearest trading post is a week's ride, assuming the roads are passable. Which they're not anymore. That night, as you tuck into a supper of boiled turnips and leftover squirrel stew, you stare at the fire and try to remember how it felt to sweat. That July sun that blistered your neck while you chopped wood for this cabin feels like a myth. It's hard to imagine heat when your bones ache from cold, even indoors. You consider sleeping in your clothes, but you already are, and still, it's not enough. You pile on blankets, including the mangy bearskin one that smells like wet dog, and curl into a ball on your straw mattress. There's a strange, eerie silence outside, except for the occasional pop of ice in the trees, branches cracking under their own weight. It sounds like distant gunfire. Your mind wanders as you drift off. Will the roof cave in? Did you stack the beams right? Are the horses going to freeze? Is it normal to feel this cold in your teeth? You might not know it yet, but this storm is just the opening act. Historically, the winter of 1816, the year without a summer, saw freak blizzards in June and crops that never came. Volcanic ash from halfway around the world blocked out sunlight, and settlers who hadn't prepared froze or starved. Some historians still debate how widespread the famine truly was, but for folks like you, caught out here in a half-built cabin, none of that matters. Cold is cold, and yours has just begun. The fire dims, the wind rattles the shutters again. You pull the blanket tighter and try not to think about tomorrow. It's going to be colder. You wake up shivering, your nose is frozen, and your breath curls in mist above your face like a ghost with nowhere better to be. You didn't think it could get colder than yesterday, but here it is, your eyelids crunchy with frost, your boots stiff as wood, and a layer of ice on the inside of the window. The fire burned down to glowing embers sometime in the early hours. You didn't have the nerve or maybe the strength to crawl out from under the pile of quilts and animal hides to stoke it. And now, well, you're paying for that choice in full-body regret. You force yourself up, barefoot on splintery floorboards that feel like walking across knives. Your joints pop with cold, you move like an old man. The log cabin creaks and groans around you, not in protest, but like it's resigned to this suffering. You jam another log into the stove, and your fingers scream when they meet the metal handle. You're not sure what hurts more, freezing them or using them. The wood hisses as it catches, and slowly warmth begins to seep back into the room, crawling across the walls like sunlight. But you're not warm yet, not by a long shot. The walls, which looked thick and sturdy in summer, are suddenly revealed to be a cruel joke. The logs don't fit flush. Gaps hide in shadows, and now that the wind is back, it whistles right through them, like a bored ghost testing for weaknesses. You can actually feel the breeze tickling your ankles while you're standing indoors. So you do what every half-smart settler does when they realise the frontier wasn't built for comfort. You grab the bucket of moss, straw, mud and horsehair and start stuffing it into every crevice you can find. It's called chinking, and right now it's your most important job. Your walls are like a kid's puzzle, the kind that looks solid until you breathe on it too hard. So you press wet mud mixed with straw between the logs and pray it freezes in place. If you're lucky, it'll last until spring. If not, well, you'll know when the snow starts drifting into your bed. You check the wall facing north, the worst one. It's already starting to frost up again. You crouch there, hands raw and aching, jamming in clumps of damp moss, your breath fogging the space in front of you. You're not even halfway done when you hear the creak of the roof. You stop moving, hold your breath. Wait. Another groan. A shifting sound. Then silence. Probably snow settling. Or maybe your roof is trying to cave in. Either way, you press on. In your better moments, you remember that these cabins weren't designed by accident. They came from hard-earned knowledge, lessons passed along by others who'd already made every mistake there was. Settlers borrowed heavily from Scandinavian, German, and even Slavic traditions, blending construction techniques into something that looked simple but carried centuries of survival wisdom. Like the overlapping roof shingles, hand-cut and laid so snow would slide instead of pile. Or the double-notched logs that locked together with primitive grace. Even the height of your windows, or lack thereof, was a defensive measure against heat loss. But knowing that doesn't make it feel any warmer. By midday you've patched enough of the worst gaps to stop the draft from actively bullying you. You take off your gloves and hold your hands near the fire, wincing as the warmth comes rushing back like punishment. Your fingers are mottled red and white. You don't say the word frostbite, but it hovers there anyway, like a wolf just outside the door. And speaking of doors, yours is starting to stick. The snow is creeping up faster than expected. You wedge a flat rock against it, just in case. Last thing you want is to get snowed in so tight you can't even open it. That happened to someone you met back in town. Took him 3 days to dig his way out with a cooking pan. Said he hallucinated a talking moose on day 2. That evening you sit back in a rickety chair by the fire, nursing a cup of pine needle tea and listening to the wind pour at the roof. You're too tired to cook anything fancy, so you boil more root vegetables and let them stew into a lumpy paste. You eat it slowly. Each bite tastes like dirt and wood smoke. But you eat it anyway. You think about the people who didn't build cabins, the ones who tried to overwinter in tents, or lean-tos, or under canvas. Some made it, sure, but many didn't. And when you look at your creaking, barely holding cabin, suddenly it feels like a castle. A wonky, leaking, ice-covered castle. Here's something odd you learned from your neighbour down the road. He swears that painting the inside of the logs with cow dung and ash helps keep the drafts out. He does it every year, and his cabin always smells like something died inside. But you've also never seen him shiver. Some say it's an old European trick. Others think it is just frontier nonsense. Either way, it's one of those strange survival rituals no one really agrees on. But he's still alive, That counts for something. As night falls, the wind picks up again. You put another log on the fire, tuck your bedroll tighter, and listen. The cabin holds, for now, but you've already spotted spots in the rafters that need reinforcing. One good snow dump and it might all collapse on your head. You don't let that thought get too big. Sleep comes in short, twitchy bursts. You wake up every hour to check the fire. It's not trust, it's instinct. You can't risk it going out. Not now, not with the temperatures dropping this fast. Somewhere far off, something howls. Not close, not yet. You ignore it. And as you lie there, surrounded by patched walls and chinking that's already starting to peel, you think, this is only the beginning. The snow hasn't even started falling hard yet. By day 3, you start to realise that if the cold doesn't get you, the firewood situation might. You were proud of your stack back in October. Neatly chopped, double rows, split maple and oak tucked under the eaves like a little forest trophy. Now, looking at what's left, you feel something closer to dread. The pile is shrinking at an alarming rate and it's only early winter. You're burning through it faster than you thought. You were way faster. And every stick you throw on the fire is one less between you and hypothermia. Firewood on the frontier isn't just fuel, it's life. It's how you cook, dry your clothes, heat your water, melt snow for the drinking, and survive those long black hours when the sun disappears behind grey clouds and forgets to come back. And chopping it is a religion. You don't chop for today, you chop like you're sold. Your soul depends on it. You chop like winter is watching. So after a breakfast of stale cornbread and weak coffee, you haul on your boots and head for the chopping stump. The axe feels like lead in your hands. Your shoulders ache from yesterday's chinking, and your fingers still haven't forgiven you for touching the stove handle barehanded. But there's no choice. You eye the snow-dusted logs stacked nearby. They're iced over now, and some are half frozen to the ground. You chip at one with the blade, free it, and set it upright on the stump. You raise the axe overhead, take a breath, and swing. The crack echoes across the clearing like a rifle shot. You swing again, and again, and again. The rhythm settles in, somewhere between miserable and meditative. Wood chips scatter. Your breath fogs the air. Snow falls gently, like it's trying not to disturb you. It's beautiful in a brutal sort of way. Back in town, some clever soul tried to invent a wood-saving stove last winter. A makeshift iron box with all sorts of vents and weird angles. The idea was to trap heat longer and reduce how often you had to refuel. It worked, sort of, but it also smoked up his whole house, and he ended up coughing his lungs out for 3 months. People still argue about whether it was genius or madness. Either way, he froze his toes that February and had to walk with a cane after. So yeah, you stick with your basic cast iron stove. Not efficient, not fancy, but at least it doesn't try to kill you. After a couple of hours, your arms are jelly, your breath feels like sandpaper, and the woodpile is finally starting to look respectable again. You stack the fresh logs carefully, making sure they'll stay dry. Moisture's the enemy. Wet wood hisses and boil, and it doesn't throw heat worth a damn. You learnt that lesson fast. You drag your sore body back inside, stamping snow off your boots and wiping your nose on your sleeve like every other half-frozen settler. The warmth hits you like a soft punch, barely more than a whisper of heat, but it's enough to make you pause and sigh. You hang your gloves by the fire and strip off your outer coat, which now weighs about 10 pounds, thanks to the damp snow clinging to it, as you ladle some stew into a tin bowl and watch the fire sputter and crack. You remember something an old-timer once said at the trading post: you never chop enough wood. You think you have, you don't. It felt dramatic at the time. Now it feels like scripture. You swear the cabin drinks firewood. You can burn through a whole day's chopping in a single night if it gets cold enough. Which it will. It's not just about volume, it's about strategy. You start separating your wood into hot and slow. The hot stuff, oak, hickory, maple, you burn in the coldest hours, when your breath clouds up even inside your coat. The slow stuff, softer woods like pine or poplar, you use when you're awake and moving to conserve the good logs. You also learn to bank the fire at night, packing in ash and coals so it smoulders instead of burning out. That way you don't have to restart it from scratch in the morning when your fingers are barely functional and the tinder's damp from condensation. There's a weird pride that starts to creep in. You've got blisters, yes, your back hurt. But you're still standing, you've made it through a few nights without freezing your eyebrows off, and most importantly, the cabin's still upright. You've even started noticing the way the fire crackles differently, depending on the wood. There's a kind of frontier poetry in that, or maybe just madness. Out here, everything becomes a system. You stack the logs crisscrossed so air can flow. You build the fire with a rhythm, kindling, softwood, hardwood. You collect the small stuff, twigs, pine cones, bark, like gold. You sweep the ashes every day to keep them from choking the stove. You ration matches. You find yourself mumbling to the fire like it's a pet that needs encouragement. Come on, stay alive. And weirdly it does. You've also begun using your body heat more cleverly. At night, you huddle as close to the fire as you dare, wrapping yourself in blankets and sticking your feet under the dog. He's not thrilled about that, but he doesn't leave either. Mutual survival pact. You do the same for him. One night, around the fire, you remember a story someone told about a trapper who used to sleep with heated rocks in a pouch. He'd bury them in the coals, fish them out with tongs, then wrap them in cloth and stick them under his blankets. Allegedly, it kept him warm till dawn. Sounds smart. You try it. You promptly burn a hole in your only good wool blanket. So, maybe not for amateurs. There's debate always about what's the best wood. Some swear by hickory, it burns hot and long. Others love ash, it splits easy and burns even when green. You use what you've got. This season it's mostly maple and some beech. Could be worse, could it be pine? Pine burns fast and leaves behind sticky creosote in your chimney, a fire hazard no one talks about until it's too late. You make a mental note to check the flue next week, or realistically next month. You're just trying to make it to Sunday, and still, every day more snow piles up like time itself, slowly and relentlessly, until the path to your woodpile becomes a trench. You dig it out again and again, but it's a losing battle. Soon you'll have to start bringing in a full day's worth at once, storing it inside by the fire to dry out. Your cabin shrinks a little each time, but when you finally sit back down at night, smoke in your hair, soot on your sleeves, cheeks flushed from the heat of a fire you earned, you feel it. Some tiny spark of stubborn pride. You haven't beaten the cold, but you haven't let it win either. By now, you've patched the cabin, chopped enough wood to wreck your shoulders, and learned the delicate art of not burning your socks while drying them. But there's still something fundamentally wrong. The cabin breathes. And not in the poetic, the house has a soul way. No, it breathes like a wheezing, leaking bellows, puffing cold drafts through the gaps in the logs you swore you sealed. It's like the wind has fingers, and it's poking you constantly. So you turn to the weird little frontier miracle nobody told you about until it was almost too late. Mud, jaw, moss, and whatever else you can cram into those crevices. It's ugly, it smells weird, but it might just keep you alive. You get back to work with your now familiar chinking mix, a gooey, gritty paste of mud and straw, thick as porridge and heavier than regret. You smear it between the logs like frosting on a cake made of frozen lumber and fear. Sometimes you use chunks of moss or tufts of animal hair if you're low on straw. Anything that can block the wind. The mess dries hard, and if you do it right, it doesn't fall out when the temperature drops below. Why did humans ever settle here? This is when you realise building the cabin was only the beginning. Winterproofing it is an entirely separate challenge. A few months ago, you were proud just to have a roof overhead. Now you're practically sleeping in your own DIY insulation project. You crawl into corners with a bucket of chinking and a stick, plugging gaps like a desperate beaver. You smear the mud along baseboards, above windows, around the doorframe, everywhere the wind likes to sneak through and bite you in the kidneys at 3 a.m. You're not the first to do this, of course. It's ancient tech. Indigenous communities had mastered wall insulation long before Europeans stumbled through with their drafty rectangles. Some used moss and sap, others wove bark mats, and some even lined their homes with animal hides in overlapping layers, like nature's version of house wrap. The settlers borrowed what they could and adapted the rest. Out here, you don't care where the idea came from if it works. You chink your walls with mashed potatoes if it stopped the wind. You're halfway through sealing the kitchen wall when you find a weird spot in the logs, a knot that's hollowed out, almost like a little burrow. Something lived there once, maybe still does. You don't look too hard. Just stuff it full of moss and whisper an apology to the previous tenant. Later that night, the difference is immediate. The wind still howls, but the room doesn't. There are no more random cold fingers brushing your spine or creeping in under the covers. The fire warms the room more evenly. You feel it in your knees first. Less ache. Then in your fingertips, no more numbness while slicing turnips. The silence in the cabin changes too. Less whistling, more gentle creaking. like it's settling into itself, becoming something real. That's not to say it's perfect. Nothing ever is out here. You still have to monitor for the inevitable shrinkage as the logs dry and shift, pulling apart some of your hard work. You'll be chinking and re-chinking all winter. But now, instead of losing heat like a sieve, the cabin holds on to it for a little longer. Maybe even long enough for you to get a full night's sleep. A full night's sleep in this weather? Now that's luxury. One afternoon you venture outside to gather more moss. Turns out it's easier to find than straw, and you're tired of dismantling the old broom. You push through thigh-deep snow, hunting along the bases of trees where the wind hasn't swept everything clean. It's greenish-grey, spongy, and weirdly warm to the touch. You fill your basket, fingers stiffening, ears burning despite the wool hat you knitted from the scratchiest yarn on earth. You pass your neighbour's place half buried in snowdrifts, and notice their walls gleam faintly, stuffed with a strange white paste. Later you'll learn they used a mix of lime, sand and animal hair. Looks fancier. Cracks just as fast. One of the oldest debates out here, besides is raccoon meat worth the risk, is what makes the best insulation. Some swear by straw, some go all in on moss. Others, especially Scandinavian transplants, try clay and dung combinations that sound gross but actually work well and last longer. The problem is that dung smells, or at least it does at first. Then your nose gives up and you stop noticing. The real downside is that it tends to attract bugs when it thaws. You quietly decide to stick with moss, even if it means another snowy hike next week. You return home and get back to sealing the loft, where the cold hits hardest. That's where the warm air rises, and, surprise, it slips out through every stupid little crack. You consider hauling your bed down to the main room to be closer to the stove. That's what a lot of people do. Some families just sleep in one room all winter, packed together like sardines in flannel. You wouldn't mind the company if you had it. For now, you settle for hanging an old wool blanket across the loft entrance to trap the heat. It flutters a bit when the wind hits, but it helps. Later that night, sitting by the stove, you finally take a long breath and let it out slowly. It's the first time in days that you haven't felt like the cold was trying to climb down your throat. The cabin is quiet, warmish, you might even say cosy. You eat supper, a mash of whatever root vegetables you haven't gone sick of yet, and stare at the walls you've now sealed with your own bare hands. They look ridiculous. Bits of straw stick out like bad haircuts. One log still weeps muddy condensation, and you're pretty sure a spider the size of your thumb is now living rent-free in one of the corners. But you did it. You turned your glorified wooden sieve into a survivable shelter. That's something. And here's the fringe fact of the night. Some folks used to add feathers to their chinking mix. Not for insulation, just to keep spirits away. Bad energy, they called it. Said wind slipping through the walls wasn't just dangerous, it was how curses got in. You're not sure you believe in that, but you do find yourself mumbling, "Stay out," every time the wind rises again. The debate still simmers among old-timers and historians. Was it better to build fast and fix later, or build slow and face the snow half-finished? Some say the real trick was to build small. One room, low ceiling, barely enough space to move, easier to heat, easier to survive. But small feels like surrender. You built bigger, hoping you'd grow into it. Now you're trying to keep that hope from freezing solid. The fire flickers low. You add another log and wrap yourself in the patched quilt your grandmother sent you 2 winters ago. One of the corners is burned, another smells like onions, but it's warm. Outside the snow keeps falling, but inside your ridiculous mud-sealed, moss-crammed, crooked cabin is finally holding strong. You don't want to talk about it, but we have to, because eventually every single person on the frontier faces the same terrible, freezing, awkward truth. The outhouse is not an option anymore, not in this weather. The path to it is covered in 2 feet of snow, the wind cuts like a knife, and your boots froze solid overnight. You're not hiking out there at 3 a.m. with your pants around your ankles. So like every sensible settler before you, you turn to the age-old, deeply humbling invention known as the chamber pot. It's not glamorous, it's not sanitary. It's not anything you'd ever want to explain to a time traveller from the future, but it is indoors, and that counts for a lot when the temperature outside can turn boiling water to snow dust before it hits the ground. You find an old enamel pot wide and deep enough to do the job. You tuck it under the bed like it's some shameful family secret. And now, you've officially crossed a frontier milestone. You're going to be peeing in a pot until April. Using the chamber pot is a logistical game. Timing is everything. You learn not to drink too much too late in the evening, or you'll wake up 3 times to squat over it, trying not to freeze your backside. You also learn that the pot fills up faster than expected, especially when it's shared, if you're lucky enough to have cabin mates. Once it's full, well, someone's got to dump it, preferably into daylight, preferably downhill. Preferably not into the snowbank where you plan to fetch your drinking water later. Dumping the chamber pot becomes a part of your morning routine, just like tending the fire or checking the woodpile. You grab the pot, carry it outside at arm's length, and toss the contents into the woods with a quick flick and a muttered apology to nature. On colder days, the contents are frozen solid, and you have to shake the thing like a maraca to get it to release. You try not to think too hard about it. You just go back inside and wash your hands in snow because hot water is a luxury and soap is rationed. What happens when you get sick during winter? What happens when someone has stomach trouble in the middle of the night? Oh, buddy. You haven't truly suffered until you've tried to clean out a chamber pot in sub-zero temperatures with your hands wrapped in mittens and your nose dripping icicles. At that point, dignity just melts, like everything else that ever made you feel civilized. All that's left is grit, prayer, and a splash of pine-scented desperation. You've heard about people who installed trapdoors in the floor, little hatches they could open and relieve themselves directly into a pit beneath the house. Sounds ingenious until you think about the cell and the rats, and what happens when that pit freezes solid and starts backing up. There are reasons those systems didn't catch on, though in some places, especially parts of Canada and the far northern territories, similar cold weather privies persisted well into the 20th century. Scholars still debate whether it was genius design or just proof that everyone eventually gives up. At night, when the fire burns low and the wind starts up again, you clutch your blankets and hold it in as long as you can. You try to mentally prepare yourself for the moment when your bladder finally overrules your willpower. The walk to the chamber pot is 5 steps, but it feels like a journey through the Arctic. You fumble with your layers, curse the buttons, and whisper angry threats to no one in particular. Then you squat, shivering over a pot of your own making, wondering what decisions in life led to this moment. Then you finish, crawl back into the bed, and try not to spill it in the dark. This is winter now. This is your life. And we haven't even gotten to number 2. Eventually, no matter how determined you are, nature calls in ways a chamber pot can't politely handle. That's when you have to make the call. Do you brave the outhouse or improvise indoors with something horrifyingly called a night soil bucket? You've heard rumours, trappers who use old crates, settlers who dig temporary holes in the cellar floor, even one tale about a family who repurposed a broken flour barrel. The stories vary and the hygiene is always questionable. But you get creative when the wind chill hits -20 and the seat in the outhouse has literally frozen over. Speaking of outhouses, you remember the first time you used yours. The seat was just a hole in a board, smoothed with sandpaper and covered with a flap of hide. In summer, it was tolerable. In early fall, it was brisk. In winter, it's a trap. If you're not careful, your skin will stick. The cold pulls the heat out of you like a vacuum, and every exposed inch of flesh regrets existing. You try to warm the seat with a hot stone, it cracks the board. You try to time it right after sunrise. The wind laughs in your face. Old-timers used to say you could tell a real frontiersman by how fast he could use the outhouse without freezing solid. Some even kept portable toilet seat covers, made of rabbit fur, soft, flexible, and slightly less awful than bare wood. They didn't survive long, though. Rats loved them. You stick with your chamber pot. One particularly grim morning, you make the mistake of putting off dumping the pot. You think, it's fine, I'll do it later. That night, the full contents freeze solid, and now you have a heavy, disgusting block of yellow ice you have to chip out like you're mining for shame. You nearly throw out your back hauling it to the woods. Lesson learned. It's not glamorous, but it's survival. You do what you have to, and you stop pretending the frontier has room for pride. It's all function over form now. You look around your cabin, straw-chinked walls, frozen window panes, a pot under the bed, and you accept that this is just the reality of winter living. You're not here for luxury. You're here to make it to spring with all your fingers and most of your sanity intact. Some settlers claim they got used to it, that after a while the rhythms of winter, the fire, the freezing, the pot, the thaw, just became background noise. Others say they never got used to it, that it chipped away at them slowly, not enough to break but enough to leave cracks. As you settle into bed, blankets wrapped tight, chamber pot safely emptied and reset beneath the bed, you realise something. It's not that this life gets easier, is that you get a little tougher each night, a little more numb to the discomfort, a little more practiced in enduring. You'll never like it, but you'll survive it. Barely. You've burned your fingers on the stove, choked down turnip stew, and become uncomfortably intimate with your chamber pot. But now it's time to talk about the thing that really decides whether you make it through the winter or wither away in a corner of your drafty little cabin. Food. More specifically, what's left of it. And whether you've got enough to survive the next 4 months without having to boil your shoes. You think back to the fall. You remember hauling sacks of potatoes, beans, dried apples, and cornmeal into the pantry like a hoarding squirrel with opposable thumbs. You remember building that root cellar, half buried into the slope behind the cabin, and lining it with straw and planks. You remember sealing jars of pickled onions, tomatoes, green beans, whatever you didn't already dry. Smoke or salt, it felt like overkill then. It doesn't now. Now you open your pantry door and realise just how fast plenty can turn into barely. The jars are fewer. The bags look thinner. That sack of flour you thought would last until March? You're halfway through already, and it's not even Christmas. The salted pork barrel still has a layer of meat, but it's floating in brine that's starting to look murky. You give it a sniff, it's fine, probably, for now. The root cellar holds up better. It's cold, dark, and smells like wet stone and dirt. Perfect for keeping things just above freezing. You descend the rickety steps with a lantern and do a quick inventory. The potatoes have sprouted tiny white fingers. The carrots are softening. A cabbage in the corner has given up completely and turned into an unrecognisable sludge. You dig around for the good stuff, trying not to gag. This is where you start learning the true art of rationing. You divide everything in your head. What you can eat now, what has to last until March, what's borderline, and what you feed to the chickens or throw into the woods for whatever's desperate enough to eat it. Every handful of dried beans becomes a precious equation. Every teaspoon of sugar is a decision. Every slice of bacon is a tiny moral dilemma. Indulge now, or save it for the day when you're so cold and so tired you might cry over a pot of boiled bark. There's a rhythm to winter eating. Breakfast is whatever's easiest to heat up. Corn mush, leftover stew, maybe a slab of fried salt pork if you're feeling decadent. Lunch is a small bowl of beans or bread with lard, maybe a pickled thing if you can spare it. Supper is where you shine. Big pot meals that stretch, soups, stews, thick with whatever root vegetables haven't gone soft and whatever meat is closest to turning questionable. You start to season things with ash, not on purpose but because you drop the ladle again and the fire's too close. You've heard of frontier families who went all in on acorn flour. Gathered in the fall, leached of tannins in cold water, dried, ground into powder. It was a pain to make, but surprisingly nutritious. You didn't do that. You were too busy finishing the roof. You regret it now. There's a peculiar pride in stretching a pantry this thin. You invent recipes. You pretend it's gourmet. You put dried apple slices in hot water and call it spiced tea. You mash turnips and put them in biscuits because, hey, that counts as innovation. And when something goes bad, when you open a jar and find a mould colony that's evolved consciousness, you bury it quietly and say nothing. You don't have time for grief. At night, you dream about butter. Just a whole stick of it, melting over a pile of biscuits you didn't have to make with bacon fat and crushed up oats. You miss eggs. You miss milk. You miss anything that didn't come out of a jar or a bag or the part of the animal you're not totally sure you cleaned right. You miss salt. Even though you technically still have some, you're guarding it like it's gold dust. Back in town, before the snow sealed off the road, someone told you about a woman who made it through an entire winter on little more than cornmeal and boiled leather. She used her old saddlebags, boiled them soft and ate them with wild onions and a spoonful of lard, lived to 93. Her stomach must have been made of iron. Or desperation. Probably both. That story comes back to you one morning as you stir your morning mush, which consists of cornmeal, melted snow and a few shavings from a dried apple. You pretend it's porridge. You pretend a lot of things now. You pretend you didn't already count the number of meals you can squeeze from the last bag of beans. You pretend you aren't worried about what happens when the last jar of pickled vegetables is gone. You pretend you aren't watching your flour dwindle grain by grain like an hourglass. There's an unspoken understanding on the frontier. You don't ask what people are eating after February. If they're still alive, you let it be, because you know some of them are trapping rodents, or melting snow for pine needle soup, or chewing on rawhide belts just to keep their mouths busy. You don't judge, you just hope you don't have to join them. Of course there are fringe strategies. You've heard of settlers who kept live eels in barrels. Gross, but They stay edible all winter. Others tried burying eggs in salt, preserving them for months. Some swore by vinegar pickles with mystery roots and herbs no one could identify. One guy used to ferment turnips in a hollow log. Allegedly it tasted like burning rubber, but he made it through 4 winters. You suspect his gut flora is from another planet. And then there's the ongoing debate. Is it better to feast early, when supplies are fresh, and accept hunger later? Or ration strictly from the start, risking starvation by spring if winter drags on too long? Some folks lean hard into the feast mentality. Live while you can, eat well in December, suffer in March. Others go into monk mode, measuring beans like they're diamonds. You're somewhere in between. Mostly because the math changes every day. Your stomach growls as you stir tonight's stew. It's mostly beans, a few carrot scraps, and one tiny square of pork fat you saved for flavour. You stare into the pot and think about how full your pantry felt 2 months ago. Now every spoonful feels like a countdown. Still, you eat. You always eat. Slowly, with purpose, because every bite is a step closer to spring. You haven't seen another human face in 12 days. That doesn't sound like much, until you realise that for all 12 of those days, you've been trapped inside your cabin with a snowbank up to the windowsills and nothing to talk to but your own echo. It's official, you're snowed in, properly, completely. The trail to the neighbour's place? Buried. The path to the road? Gone. The trees have vanished behind walls of white, and you haven't even spotted smoke from another chimney in over a week. You could be the last person alive on Earth and have no way of knowing. You wonder briefly if this is how time slows down. Or breaks entirely. At first, it was kind of peaceful. The snowfall was soft and slow, like someone laying down a blanket over the world. You sat by the fire with your stew, watching the flakes pile up, thinking, wow, this is actually kind of cosy. And then it kept snowing, and snowing, and snowing, and now you've got 3 feet of it blocking your front door and drifts taller than you pressed up against the windows. The only light in the cabin is what leaks through the ice-fogged panes. You feel like you're living inside a snow globe that someone shook and then forgot about. You try to dig out a little each day, but it's like fighting the tide with a spoon. The wind just shoves it all back the moment you turn around. You clear a tunnel to the woodshed, but it collapses overnight. You build it again. It collapses again. Eventually, you accept that you're not getting out until this storm takes a break, or you run out of firewood, whichever comes first. Cabin fever isn't just a joke, it's a slow unravelling. At first, it's little things. You forget what day it is. You stop changing your shirt because it doesn't matter. You talk to yourself, not just muttering, but full conversations. You start narrating your chores in a dramatic voice. You thank the pot for boiling correctly. You apologise to the log you just burned for being slightly damp. You develop strong opinions about which spoon is the good spoon. You have no idea how much of this is funny and how much is a warning sign. That's why a lot of families, especially the big ones, would prepare special games or stories just for this time. They'd carve little figurines, sew patchwork puzzles, or pass down folktales thick with ghosts, snow spirits, and tricksters. You don't have kids running around your feet. You've got silence and the sound of your own joints creaking when you sit too long. So you make your own entertainment. You draw in the soot on the windows, you count the knots in the ceiling beams, you recite every single line of that one letter you got in November, like it's a stage play. Back when you still had visitors, someone gave you a book. Only half the pages intact and most of them water-stained, but you've read it 4 times now. The plot makes no sense. The characters all blur together. But you love it. You love the familiarity, the repetition. You even start rewriting the ending in your head, giving the doomed lovers a chance to just stay warm and live quietly somewhere, because that feels more radical than a dramatic death these days. You try not to think about the neighbours, the millers down the ridge. They were still chopping wood when you last passed their cabin in November, hadn't finished sealing the roof. You wonder if they're okay. You wonder if you'll find out before spring. You consider hiking out there, just to check. But then you open the door, see the blizzard still raging, and close it again with a quiet, defeated grunt. The snow isn't just deep, it's alive. It's pushing back against every effort you make. You swear you saw the top of a tree get swallowed whole. There's an old frontier trick for judging when you'll finally get a break in the weather. Listen for sounds, not just quiet, but the kind of silence that rings in your ears, like the sky holding its breath. When the wind stops screaming and the flakes start to fall vertically again, that's when you grab your shovel. That's when you dig your way to a better vantage point and hope to see something besides endless white. And here's the weird part. Sometimes being snowed in brings people together. When you can get to each other, you cling. You share stories, food, tools, and that rare thing called laughter. But when you can't get to anyone, it's just you and your thoughts. And your thoughts, they can be real jerks. You start second-guessing everything. Should you have trapped more rabbits, planted more turnips, built the cabin 6 feet higher, married someone with a warmer cabin? It's amazing how many life decisions can be questioned while pacing in long underwear next to a fire that won't quite warm your toes. Sometimes you think about what city folks are doing this time of year. Probably dancing at some winter social, eating something called baked oysters, wrapped in silken wool and ignorance. You picture them with champagne talking about poetry while you're scraping frost off your beard and trying not to scream when your blanket slips off at 3 a.m. Not that you'd trade places, not exactly, but still. You remember an old journal you read once from a trapper up north. He described a snowed-in winter as living inside a pause. Not dead, not asleep, just suspended. The world frozen in place, waiting. You get that now. You feel it deep in your bones. You're waiting too. For spring, for a thaw, for anything that doesn't feel like survival by default fault. And then, one morning, it's different. You wake up and the cabin is quiet. Not cabin fever quiet, real quiet. You peer out the window and see the snow falling straight down for the first time in weeks. The wind is gone, the air feels lighter, like a shift. You step outside and blink against the sudden brightness. Sunlight glinting off a pristine white landscape so clean it looks painted. The trail to the woodshed is gone again, but today you have the strength to dig it. You don't see your neighbours, you still can't make it to the road, but you feel something you haven't in a while. Possibility. And that's enough. For now. There's a moment just after sunrise, when the inside of your cabin feels almost bearable. The fire's been tended through the night, your extra quilts didn't slide off, and your feet, for once, aren't numb bricks of regret. You stretch out in bed for a few luxurious seconds, and for a fleeting moment, you don't hate winter. Then you hear the chickens screaming. You're on your feet in an instant, heart lurching like a trap springing she. You yank on your boots, still damp, and race outside, slipping down the icy steps. The coop's not far from the cabin, just across the yard and a little downhill. You built it sturdy back in fall, but sturdy in frontier terms just means might survive a stiff wind if it's feeling generous. What you find makes your stomach knot. The door's ajar, snow is drifted halfway in, and feathers, lots of them, are satted in the fresh powder like a grim little snow angel exploded. Inside, the chickens are panicked. One is missing, another is limping. The rest are squawking and flapping in a frenzy. You find bloody tracks near the corner. Big ones. A fox, probably, or maybe something hungrier. Whatever it was, it figured out how to pry open the latch. You patch the door, reinforce the hinges, and add a crude wooden lock. Then you sit in the coop for a while, listening to the nervous clucks as the birds slowly settle. They're more than just eggs and meat now. They're heat. They're company, and on some nights you swear they're the only thing reminding you that life still exists outside your own brain. You've spent more hours this winter sitting in the coop than you'd ever admit. Wrapped in your coat, cheeks raw, watching them peck and shift and do their weird little chicken rituals. It's oddly soothing, like a crackling fire but feathered. Which brings us to the strange habit you picked up recently, sharing your body heat with livestock. Oh yes, you've entered that phase of frontier winter. When night falls and the fire burns low and the temperature drops to the sort of cold that makes your teeth feel brittle, you stop caring about personal space or species. You start sleeping closer to the animals, and if you're lucky enough to have a barn or even a lean-to, you might start bedding down in there yourself, because warm is warm and dignity is optional. You remember the stories, of course. Farmers who moved their goats indoors, families who shared their one-room cabins with pigs and ducks and everything in between. The idea always sounded vaguely horrifying until now. Now it just sounds like not dying. You try it. Just one chicken at first. She's a scrawny thing, molting in patches, but warm and docile enough. You tuck her inside your coat for a bit while you read by the fire. She clucks once and settles in. It's weird. And it works. So the next night you bring in 2 more. Then the runt goat when the wind picks up and the barn starts making groaning noises you don't trust. Before long, your cabin smells like a petting zoo and your bed rustles more than it should. But you're warm. That's the deal. You make adjustments. You add straw to the floor near the hearth. You build a makeshift partition with crates and hang a blanket between you and the new guests. mostly to keep the goat from chewing your socks. You try not to think about hygiene. You remind yourself it's temporary. Then you remember it's January, so not that temporary. Frontier life was always about compromise, and right now you're compromising with a goat named Ethel who thinks the firewood stack is her new climbing wall. She's already chewed a corner off your only decent quilt. You don't have the heart to scold her. You'd probably chew a blanket too, if your teeth were your only form of rebellion. Some people swore by bringing animals in during storms. Others thought it was madness. There's still debate over whether the added warmth outweighed the health risks. Lice, parasites, respiratory issues, you name it. Scholars argue over old records, trying to piece together whether these were widespread habits or the desperate choices of the poor and isolated. The truth, as always, is somewhere in between. People did what they had to do, and sometimes that meant cuddling a goat while your stew simmered on the stove. Speaking of stew, you start to notice how much faster your food cooks now that the cabin holds heat better. Between the fire, the animals, and the block drafts, you've created a kind of ecosystem. Messy, loud, slightly smelly, but functional. You even stop wearing your outer coat indoors. It feels like progress. You glance out the window and catch sight of the snow-covered coop. You've reinforced it now with stones at the base and a second latch. You check it twice a day, even when it's freezing. Because a dead chicken in January means one less egg in March. And you can't afford that, not anymore. One night, curled up in bed with your breath still fogging the air, you think back to something your father once said. If it's warm and it isn't trying to eat you, it's a friend. You thought he was joking. You now realise he was being completely literal. Of course there are limits. You've drawn a firm line at the raccoon that keeps showing up near the porch. Too bold, too clever. You caught it trying to open the feed bin with both paws like a tiny burglar. You respect it, but you also keep the axe close when it's around. Some guests you can't let in. In the meantime, your fire is strong, your animals are alive, and your own body heat is being multiplied by a chorus of warm, rhythmic breathing in the shadows. You're not alone. Not really. It's weirdly comforting. And if someone had told you last year that your winter survival plan would involve sleeping next to a farting goat and using chickens as space heaters, you would have laughed. Now, you tuck the blanket tighter and whisper to the hen on your chest, "We're gonna make it." And she clucks like she agrees. There's something oddly satisfying about stepping outside and finding your meat perfectly frozen, waiting for you like nature's own icebox. Of course, you have to hack it out of the snowbank first, sometimes with a hatchet, and then thaw it slowly next to the fire like it's a particularly frosty artifact. But still, no refrigeration required. No salt, no smoke, no buried clay jars. Just winter doing the one thing it's undeniably good at: preserving. You've got a small stash of meat buried in the snow behind the cabin, wrapped in linen marked with stones, and far enough from the coop to avoid drawing attention from the wrong kind of visitor. It's mostly rabbit and squirrel, tough, stringy stuff that tastes like bark unless you drown it in onion and grease. But it keeps, and in weather like this, anything that keeps is sacred. Back in the fall, you did what every settler with an ounce of sense does. You salted and smoked as much meat as you could manage. The pigs went first, then a deer you caught before the snow fell. You spent days turning meat into something shelf-stable, hanging strips over a slow fire, rubbing salt into every fold, sealing the jerky in waxed linen. You didn't enjoy it. It made your hands ache, your eyes burn, and your clothes stink. But now, as you stare down February with your gut growling and your pantry thinning, you're grateful for every shriveled hunk of preserved sinew hanging from your ceiling. Smoking meat is part science, part black magic. You keep the fire low, the smoke dense, and the airflow just right. If the fire gets too hot, you cook the meat instead of preserving it. Too cool, and it moulds. Everyone swears by their own method. Some use hickory, some swear by applewood. One guy back in town uses dried cow dung and insists it gives the meat a rustic flavour. You hope never to find out. The salt barrel, though, that's your real treasure. Coarse crystals and thick slabs of pork submerged in brine that's nearly solid from the cold. You lift the lid and the smell hits you. Sharp, meaty, metallic. Not pleasant, but not rotten either. You chip off a piece, cut it thin and fry it with beans. It sizzles and curls like a greasy little miracle. Then there's the meat you didn't plan for. The kind that shows up unexpectedly, trapped, shot, or stumbled across when desperation outweighs good judgment. You remember the time you went out to gather firewood and found a hare half frozen under a drift. Still alive, barely. You hesitated, just long enough to feel guilty, and then did what had to be done. That night, You ate stew that was half meat, half apology. Not all settlers were hunters, but most had to become them. Out here, the store is too far, the road impassable, and your appetite doesn't care that you have never held a rifle before. So you learn, you set snares, you track prints, you aim and you miss. Then you try again. Sometimes you bring home dinner, sometimes you just bring home frostbite and a bad mood. You've also started getting creative. You boil bones for stock until they fall apart in your hands. You scrape the fat, render it into lard, and store it in old jars for cooking. You use organ meat in stew, even if it turns your stomach a bit. You once made a broth out of squirrel liver, onion skins, and pickling spices. Tasted like regret, but it filled your belly. There's a grim little debate among old-timers about which winter preservation method was best. Smoking is reliable but labour-intensive. Salting is easier but requires a lot of storage and a steady salt supply. Freezing is convenient but only works as long as the snow keeps falling. Some settlers combined all three, salted meat smoked, and then frozen solid in the back of a shed. Others skipped preservation altogether and relied on fresh kills, hunting every few days to stay ahead of hunger. Risky, efficient if you've got the skill, suicidal if you don't. Then there are the real fringe folks. The ones who tried drying meat in the rafters above the stove or fermenting it in buried pots. One eccentric man downriver used to wrap his meat in linen soaked with whiskey and hang it under the eaves, claimed it gave it character. He also lost all his teeth by 42, so you take his advice with a grain of salt. Pun definitely intended. Still, the frozen meat stash works for now. You keep it buried and marked. You check for tracks every morning because you're not the only one who appreciates conveniently preserved protein. The fox that got your chicken is probably sniffing around your stash already. So you scatter ash and pine needles to cover the scent, hang a few strips higher up, and mutter a half-hearted threat to the woods in general. Some nights you lie awake and think about meat, not eating it, but how much longer you can stretch it. You do the mental math. How many slabs are left? How many days until the first thaw? How many meals you can make with just broth and barley before the stew becomes more water than food. You think about rationing again. Then your stomach growls and you cut off another piece of smoked squirrel and tell your future self to figure it out later. And through it all, there's a grim satisfaction in knowing that the frontier forces you to use everything. Every cut, every scrap, every drop of grease. Waste nothing because winter notices. You even scrape the skin and boil it to make glue, or boil the hooves and make gelatin, or use the bones to carve tools. Your table knife? A deer rib you polished and sharpened yourself. It's not pretty, but it slices just fine. Tonight you cook the last of the brined pork. The fat pops in the pan, and for a moment the smell fills the cabin with something that feels like luxury. You fry some onions with it, toss in beans, maybe even a shred of dried apple. You eat slowly, reverently, like this is more than dinner. It's proof that you're still managing. You stare at the dwindling meat hooks, the bare patches in the smokehouse ceiling, and the one stubborn squirrel tail you hung up there for luck. It flaps slightly in the draft. You're not rich, you're not full, but you're not starving, not yet. And on the frontier, in the dead of winter, that's the definition of thriving. You haven't felt properly dry in weeks, not truly. Your socks hang by the fire every night like defeated flags, stiff from smoke and wear, and your boots haven't been warm since the first snowfall. It's not just your clothes either, it's your sin, your bones. Everything about you feels slightly damp and extremely cold. Which is why, by now, you've stopped caring about fashion or appearances or even smelling decent. All that matters is staying warm, and for that you've developed a deep, almost spiritual relationship with your clothes, layer upon layer of wool, fur, leather, and desperation. Your shirt? Wool. It itches like betrayal but traps heat like nothing else. Your long underwear? Wool again, and it's turned to something resembling cardboard from repeated freezing and thawing. Over that, a vest made from an old horse blanket. Then your trousers, lined with flannel. Then a coat patched with squirrel hide on one side and some mystery fur on the other. You've started naming your layers just to keep track. Your mittens are made from deer hide, stitched together with bone needles and pure stubbornness. They smell like tallow and regret, but you'd rather lose a finger than take them off outside. Changing clothes? That's comedy now. Nobody does that, not in January. You sleep in what you wear. You work in what you sleep in. You peel off socks only when the fire's hot enough to thaw your toes without snapping them off. Bathing? That's a summer hobby. Right now you scrub your armpits with snow and call it good. Your shirt has developed its own personality, a stiff, smoky creature that clings to you like a jealous ghost. You hate it. You love it. It's keeping you alive. Frontier clothing is all about materials, and wool is king. Heavy wool, tightly woven, even when soaked, keeps its insulation. The settlers who showed up in cotton learned fast. Cotton freezes, cotton clings, cotton kills. You've seen old photographs, men in cotton shirts and trousers trying to look dignified while quietly freezing to death from the knees down. You wish you could go back in time and hand them a buffalo robe and a warning. Speaking of robes, you managed to trade for one last fall, a tattered, moth-bitten buffalo hide from a trader who said it still had some miles left in it. He wasn't lying. You've slept under that thing for the past month, sometimes wrapping it around yourself like a cloak, sometimes just throwing it over your shoulders while you stir the fire. It smells faintly like smoke and earth and beast. It's itchy in some places, bald in others, and absolutely sacred now. You'd give up coffee before you'd give up that robe. Some days you catch a glimpse of yourself in the mirror, or what passes for one, and you almost laugh. You look like a walking pile of fabric, fur and filth, a scarecrow that wandered off from the cornfield and got lost in the snow. Your hat alone is an engineering miracle. Raccoon fur on the outside, wool on the inside, a leather strap tied under your chin to keep the wind from stealing it. You never take it off indoors. What's the point? Your hair's a bird's nest and your ears will crack like dry leaves if they get too cold. The weird part is how quickly you get used to it. At first, you kept trying to feel clean, fresh, normal. Now you wrap an extra scarf around your face, secure it with a stick pin, and trudge through a snowbank like a pioneer ninja. The fewer parts of your body exposed to the air, the better. You've learnt the hard way what frostbite looks like, and worse, what it smells like. Out here, people talk about clothing the way others talk about horses or rifles, with reverence and jealousy. That there's a double-stitched wool vest lined with beaver hide, someone might say, as if describing treasure. I'd trade half a pig for one of those. And they mean it. Because good winter clothes aren't fashion, they're armour. Survival gear. A difference between waking up with fingers or waking up with little black stubs. You remember one neighbour who swore by rabbit skin socks. Made a pair himself from skins he'd dried, scraped and stitched by hand. Said they were softer than anything you could trade for. But the stitching came loose mid-January, and he ended up with a frozen toe before he could fix them. That's the thing about frontier gear. It works until it doesn't, and failure is rarely gentle. Some frontier women used to wear men's coats in winter. Larger, boxier, easier to layer under. Others padded their skirts with horsehair or wore trousers underneath, scandal be damned. The goal wasn't to look proper. It was to not freeze to death while hauling water or chasing chickens out of the root cellar. Function first, always. And then there were the true eccentrics. One man, apparently, spent 3 winters wrapped in nothing but bare hide and pride, refusing to sew sleeves. Said it toughened the soul, as he also lost 2 fingers and went mostly blind from snow glare. But sure, tough soul. You think about all this as you sit by the fire, boots off, socks steaming, bare feet slowly regaining feeling. You know you'll have to put everything back on again soon. You're going to the woodshed. The snow is deep, the wind is hungry, but for a few minutes you let your skin breathe, let your body stretch, let the fire lick warmth back into your aching knees. You've started sewing more, more too. You've patched every piece of clothing you own at least once. You used to be terrible with a needle. Now you're a mediocre genius. You patch with leather strips, squirrel hide, old flour sacks, anything that holds. You even stitched a tear in your glove with sinew pulled from a rabbit's leg. It holds. You hope it keeps holding. The fire crackles. Your scarf is dry. Your coat smells like wet goat. But it's warm. You pull it back on. 1 layer at a time you armour up again. Wool hide, grease-stained mittens, buffalo robe slung over your shoulder like a cloak from some post-apocalyptic fashion show. Outside the wind howls. Inside you button your collar and pull your hat low. Let it howl, you're ready. By this point in winter you start to understand why socks are sacred. Not fancy socks, not the kind that come in neat little pairs with bright colours and no intention of ever touching a boot, but real socks. Thick, itchy, hand-knitted beasts made from coarse wool and pure willpower. The kind that you wear until they fall apart and then wear some more. Because on the frontier, warm feet are the difference between a good day and an emergency amputation. You've got 3 good pairs if we're being generous. One with a hole in the heel, one with a hole in the toe, and one that's mysteriously holding together by some kind of divine intervention. You rotate them carefully. Dry one pair by the fire while wearing another. Always have a backup. Never, ever leave your last dry pair out overnight, because there's nothing more miserable than trying to stuff wet socks into frozen boots at dawn. And yet, somehow, that still happens more than you'd like. So you've taken up knitting. Yes, you. With your cracked hands and half-frozen fingers, and a patience level generally reserved for boiling water. Because out here everyone knits, or tries to, and if they don't, they barter hard for someone who does. Scarves, hats, gloves, blankets, but especially socks. You now believe that a good pair of socks is worth more than gold, whiskey, or even coffee. Their warmth, their peace, their mental stability in a foot-shaped form. You dig out the knitting needles you bartered for last fall, a pair of old iron spikes polished down to something usable. Then you pull out the wool you've been hoarding like a dragon guarding treasure. Some came from a neighbour's sheep, one from unravelling that horrible sweater someone gifted you years ago. The one that felt like it was knitted from wire and thistles. Waste not. At first, your stitches look like a crime scene. Loops too tight, others too loose. Weird holes in places you didn't think holes could form, but eventually your hands learn the rhythm. You sit by the fire wrapped in layers, listening to the wind scream through the trees, and you stitch. In, out, in, around. Pull through, tighten. The same moves over and over. It's almost meditative. Almost. You find yourself measuring time by how many rows you've finished. The worst blizzard of the month. That was a 4-row storm. The day your water barrel cracked from the cold. 2 rows and a lot of swearing. The night the goat knocked over your stew pot and nearly burned the cabin down. 5 rows, tight and angry. You start gifting socks too, or offering to. Your neighbour passed by before the last storm, just long enough to trade a jar of honey and complain that her kid's toes were going blue. You gave her a pair of your early attempts, lumpy, mismatched, but thick enough to serve as insulation. She cried over socks. That's the power these things have now. They're not clothing, they're currency. They're survival tokens. And it's not just you. Across the ridge, down the hollers, scattered into frozen cabins tucked into the woods, there are women and men knitting like their lives depend on it. Because they kind of do. Some families had knitting circles. Informal groups where people would sit together, bundled in shawls and layers, stitching and talking, and passing the time. It wasn't just productive, it was sanity. And out here, sanity gets pretty scarce around January. Not everyone knits though. Some sew, some crochet, some just unravel old clothes and braid them into ropes or rugs or curtain ties. But wool's the star. Always has been. Always will be. Especially in places like this, where the winters are so long they feel like another season entirely. Pre-winter, winter, deep winter and mud. There's a fringe practice too, felting. You've heard about it but haven't dared try. It involves wetting wool, agitating it with soap, then compressing it into dense fabric. Some settlers used it to make boot liners or insoles, supposedly warmer than anything else but hard to do without ruining the material. There are stories of entire blankets lost to overzealous felting experiments. Some folks even tried felting with their feet, stomping on soaked wool until it took shape. You haven't gone that far, yet. There's debate always about the best sock pattern. Toe up versus cuff down, ribbed versus flat. Some swear by knitting 2 at once to avoid the heartbreak of a lonely sock. Others think that's witchcraft. One particularly heated argument broke out in town last year between 2 sisters who disagreed about whether to double the heel yarn for strength. They didn't speak for a month. Your own socks are a patchwork of mistakes and tiny triumphs. A dropped stitch here, a too tight band there. One of them fits your foot like a second skin. The other flops around like a sad woolen eel. But when the temperature drops below 0 and the fire doesn't quite cut it, they're both heaven. Some days, when your fingers stop throbbing and your shoulders aren't locked from chopping wood, you settle in for an hour of quiet knitting. Just you, the fire, the animals shifting in their corners, and the slow click of needle against needle. You've started humming when you do it, sometimes even talking to the socks like they're old friends being coaxed into existence. Hang in there, you whisper. You're gonna be warm. At night, you tuck the finished pairs into a sack you keep near the fire. You rotate them religiously, making sure none go stiff from neglect. If you could hug them without looking ridiculous, you probably would. Every time you slide your feet into a dry, thick pair, you remember why you took this up in the first place. Because warmth is everything, comfort is rare, and a handmade sock fresh off the needles is a quiet miracle in a world where the wind howls and the snow never stops. You settle into bed with your newest pair, still smelling faintly of sheep and wood smoke. You curl your toes, feel the warmth spread, and sigh. Another day survived. Another row done. There's a pot on the stove that hasn't been emptied in 6 days. You just keep adding to it. Bits of potato, dried beans, turnip chunks, a sliver of smoked squirrel from 2 nights ago, and yesterday's crust of cornbread crumbled in for texture. The broth changes colour depending on what you toss in. Sometimes brown, sometimes grey. Once it turned a shade of green you didn't trust, but you boiled it longer and called it earthy. It's not pretty, but it's food. And that pot? That's your lifeline, your slow-cooked miracle. You call it stew. Other people might call it what's left. Either way, it's dinner. And lunch. And sometimes breakfast if the cold's bad and the mood's worse. You stir it with the same spoon every time, wiping it on your pant leg between meals because, frankly, soap is for spring, or immersion is, or guests, and nobody's visiting until the thaw. The secret to surviving a frontier winter isn't just having food, it's knowing how to stretch it. You learn to make broth out of bones so clean you could use them for knitting needles. You boil dried beans until they surrender their last molecule of flavour. You thicken stew with crushed up crackers or cornmeal or whatever mystery flour you can scrounge from the bottom of a bag. Every scrap is treasure. Every leftover goes back in the pot. The frontier doesn't do waste. People talk about stone soup like it's a fairy tale. Out here, it's just a Tuesday. You wouldn't be above dropping a clean rock into the pot if you thought it'd fool your brain into thinking there was more in there. But you've already tried that. The brain's not that dumb. Still, you've learned that food is mostly memory. Add a pinch of spice, what little you have, and you can pretend you're eating something different. Even if it's the same stew you've had for a week and a half. You remember the luxury of seasoning. Salt used to be something you took for granted. Now it's rationed with the kind of reverence most people reserve for diamonds. Pepper, a myth. Cinnamon, extinct. You've got a jar of dried sage you guard like it contains the cure for winter itself. You used a pinch last Sunday and cried a little. Or maybe it was the onions. Hard to say. Out here, meals aren't social events, they're survival drills. You eat when the food's hot, when your hands are free, and when the fire's steady enough that you don't have to babysit it. You eat in seven mostly, unless you count the wind screaming through the cracks in the shutters, which honestly you kind of do. It's developed a personality at this point. You've stopped caring about variety. Now it's all about consistency. A stew that's warm, fills your belly, and doesn't make you question your life choices too much. That's a success. You don't want exciting, you want edible. And if it's got a little grease floating on top, well, that's a good sign. Fat means calories. Calories mean energy. Energy means you get to survive another day without eating your own bootlaces. There's a story you remember, told by an old man in town. He said his mother once made a stew that lasted 42 days, called it eternal stew. Just a pot that never went empty, always simmering, always accepting scraps. He said the flavour got so rich by the 3rd week that it started tasting like memory itself. You're not quite there, but you understand the idea. After a while, the stew becomes part of the cabin, like the walls or the hearth. It's just there, bubbling away, holding you together. And when the pot gets too low, you add water. Always more water. You've melted enough snow to fill a lake by now. You can tell just by taste which flakes came from clean drifts and which had a bit of ash in them. You aim for clean, but beggars don't test for purity. You boil it anyway. Let the fire do its magic. Hope for the born. You've noticed, too, that the act of cooking, simple as it is, helps pass the long afternoons. Stirring, tasting, adding a pinch of something. Adjusting the fire. Watching the steam curl. Gives you something to do that isn't just stare into the void or argue with your coat rack out of boredom. You chop vegetables that are more bruised than flesh, peel potatoes that resemble ancient fossils, and thank the heavens every time you find an onion that hasn't sprouted or gone squishy. You've become an expert at gut check math. How many servings are left in the pot, how much you can thin it before it becomes soup, and how many more days you can pretend to enjoy turnip before the taste starts appearing in your dreams. You also know exactly how long to chew each bite to make it last without triggering existential dread. Scholars still debate whether the frontier diet was sustainable or slowly debilitating. Most agree that caloric intake was adequate during fall and early winter, but by late February, malnutrition crept in, scurvy, fatigue, hair loss. Some settlers tried to compensate with pine needle tea or dried berries they hoarded all season. Others just gritted their teeth, lost weight, and kept going. You've started drinking pine tea yourself. Tastes like the floor of a forest and vaguely of regret. but it's packed with vitamin C and, hey, it's warm. One particularly fringe method of stretching meals involved soaking old bread in milk or broth until it turned into a paste. Porridge, they called it generously. Some mixed it with lard and called it dumplings. Others just ate it with a spoon and didn't make eye contact with anyone. You tried it once, called it panic pudding. It wasn't your worst meal. Tonight you stir your stew again. It's thinner than you'd like. You toss in a piece of dried apple, not for flavour, just for surprise. Something different. A soft sweetness to cut through the salt and starch. You let it simmer while you pat your gloves, thinking how strange it is that something as simple as a warm bowl could be the difference between holding it together and screaming into the void. When it's ready, you eat slowly, savouring each bite like it's a story being told just to you. It's not amazing, it's not exciting, but it's hot, it's familiar, and it's yours. You finish the bowl and refill the pot. A handful of barley, a piece of carrot, a pinch of sage. The stew lives on, so do you. You sip your pine needle tea and stare into the fire like it owes you money. Outside, the wind is howling like a wounded animal, the kind that's just found out it's not the apex predator anymore. The cabin creaks, the shutters rattle, and the snow taps against the windows like tiny fingers asking to come in. This is what passes for ambience now. You've got firelight, the blizzard, and a slightly unsettling draft from the north wall that you've named Harold because it's been whispering to you all week. You're not lonely exactly, but you're also not fine. There's a creeping sense, like something in your head is starting to unravel just a little. You talk to the kettle, you thank the stew pot, you apologise to the chair when you stub your toe on it. You know it's not normal, but what even is normal when you haven't seen another person in 21 days and you're sharing living quarters with a chicken named Agnes? They don't talk about cabin fever much in history books, not really. They mention it like a footnote. Some settlers experience psychological strain during extended winters. That's a very polite way of saying people went off the rails. Some quietly lost track of the days and forgot their own names. Others got creative, writing plays, staging puppet shows, drawing faces on logs and assigning them backstories. There was that one guy in the Yukon who married a broom. You're not there yet, but you did catch yourself laughing, like you're really laughing, when the goat tripped over your boot and fell into the woodpile. You laughed too hard, it was concerning, but that's where the whiskey comes in. You didn't plan to drink much this winter. Maybe a celebratory sip around the holidays, a hot toddy on the coldest night. But by the second week of January, you started reaching for the bottle a little more often. Not to get drunk, never enough for that. Just to smooth the edges, warm the belly, take the sting out of the kind of boredom that makes you seriously consider organising your nails by size and naming them after Greek gods. The bottle is half empty now. You nurse it like it's medicine, which out here it sort of is. Whiskey's good for shock, minor pain, disinfecting wounds, calming nerves, and apparently emotional therapy when you're snowed in with a chicken and the same stew you've been eating since last Sunday. You pour yourself a finger's worth and sit near the fire, swaddled in your buffalo robe, staring at the shadows dancing on the walls. You start to imagine their figures. People, maybe. One of them kind of looks like your brother, the one you haven't seen in 2 years. Another looks like your mother, just long enough to make you feel something unpleasant in your chest. You look away. This is when the stories start to come back. You remember tales you were told as a kid, half-wild frontier legends whispered around fires, handed down by people who'd spent too many winters staring at the same four walls. There was the Snow Witch, who lured travellers off the trail with the sound of children crying. The spirit of the frozen hunter, still searching for the deer he never found, stomping across rooftops at night. There was even a story about a log cabin that got tired of holding people and swallowed its owner whole one stormy February night. No one could prove it, but no one lived on that land anymore either. You used to laugh at those stories. Now you stare at your walls and wonder if they're holding steady. You wonder if that shadow's just a coat or if it's something older, darker, watching. You tell yourself it's the whiskey. You stop drinking for the night. Mostly. Folklore isn't just entertainment out here, it's how people made sense of the silence, the isolation, the things their minds did when winter dragged on too long. Gave shape to fear, made it manageable. You don't believe in snow witches. But sometimes when you hear a tapping on the window that isn't from the wind, you hesitate before looking. The frontier had its own language for this mental slipping. People called it soul madness, the winter sickness, or simply going soft in the head. Everyone knew someone who snapped. Usually quiet types, kept to themselves. till one day they walked out into a blizzard without a coat or burned all their furniture in a panic and froze inside their homes. There's a long-standing debate among historians about how common cabin fever really was. Some argue it's been exaggerated, or that most people were too busy staying alive to lose their minds. Others suggest it was widespread, just not well documented because no one wanted to admit it. You tend to side with the latter, because it's happening to you a little, not dramatically, but in whispers, in strange thoughts. In the way you forgot what day it was and didn't really care to check. You light a second candle tonight, not for light, for company. You pretend it's someone else in the room, just out of sight. You sit quietly, the fire popping, the stew bubbling, the snow sliding down the roof in heavy thumps. The goat snores in the corner, the chicken rustles, and the wind says your name in a voice that's probably just your imagination. You pull the buffalo robe tighter. You hum a song you don't remember learning. You drink one last sip of whiskey, and you remind yourself that this is normal, that this happens to everyone, that you're not talking to yourself, you're just narrating. A little story to keep your brain busy, because in this cabin, this cold, this quiet, stories are medicine too, so you keep telling them, even if no one's listening, especially then. You don't know exactly when the howling changed. You've grown used to wind, used to its voice slamming against the cabin at night like a drunk trying to pick a fight. But last night, as you huddled next to the fire with the stew bubbling low and the goat mumbling in her sleep, the sound outside shifted. Not louder, just different, sharper, hungrier. And when you cracked open the door this morning, you found the answer etched clearly in the snow. Tracks, big ones. Paw prints the size of your hand pressed deep into the drifts around the barn like a warning. Wolves. You already knew they were out there. You've heard them howling in the distance, a chorus of voices carried across the trees. Haunting, sure, but far enough away that it didn't feel personal. But this is different. They've come closer than they should. The tracks circle the barn, linger near the coop, lead toward the root cellar, then back again, over and over. A perimeter patrol, and somewhere in the snow, one of your chickens is missing. You take the axe out with you now, even for short trips. You scan the woods constantly, trying not to imagine yellow eyes watching from the trees. And the barn? That's become a fortress. You check every latch, every hinge, every window. You stuff extra hay under the doors. You keep the lantern lit all night. The animals are jumpy too. The chickens won't settle. The goat's got her hackles up. And even the old mule won't stop pacing in his stall, hooves clattering like warning bells. Wolves in winter aren't just dangerous. They're bold, desperate, hungry enough to take risks they'd never dare in warmer months. And out here, there's no one coming to help if something goes wrong. You remember a story from back home? About a settler who lost half his livestock to a pack in a single night. Said he heard them howling, then nothing. Then woke up to find blood frozen in the snow and not much else. He moved back east the next spring. You're not planning on going anywhere, but you're also not planning to let yourself or your animals become wolf chow. So you set up noise traps. Pans strung together with rope, old tin cups balanced on ledges, even a makeshift alarm made from a rusty bell and a length of twine. Anything to give you a few extra seconds of warning. At night, you sleep light, the axe close, your ears tuned to every creak, groan and shifting shadow. There's something deeply primal about being hunted. You feel it in your spine, in the way your body refuses to relax fully. Even inside your patched-up cabin, with the fire roaring and every door bolted, you never feel entirely safe. You dream of eyes, of teeth, of dark shapes moving through snow like smoke, and then comes the fringe fact you wish you didn't know. Some wolves, especially older, solitary males, will test structures. Not just sniff around, they'll watch, observe, come back night after night to check for weaknesses. You read that in an old trapper's journal once, and now it's stuck in your head like a splinter. Every time the wind kicks up and something shifts outside, you wonder if it's just the snow, or something patient with claws. You consider setting traps of your own, snares maybe, or an old bear trap you traded for back in October. But you hesitate. Wolves are clever. Miss once, and they won't come back. Or worse, they'll come back angry. You'd rather keep them guessing. There's a debate among settlers about the best defence. Some swear by dogs, big, loud, loyal. Others say firelight is enough. A few claim that just marking your territory with scent, yes, that kind of scent, will keep predators at bay. You haven't gone that far. Yet. You do burn more at night now. Extra lanterns, candles, anything to make the cabin glow like a beacon. It's a waste of oil, sure, but peace of mind is worth a lot when you're trying to sleep without imagining teeth in the dark. You hang hides over the windows too, not just for warmth anymore, but because the thought of something peering in is too much. And still, they come. 2 nights ago, you saw one. You were out back checking the coop one last time before bed, when your lantern caught the glint of eyes between the trees. Low to the ground, unmoving, watching, your breath froze in your throat. You didn't move, neither did it. You counted to 10. It blinked once. Then it was gone, silent, effortless, like a ghost made of hunger. Back inside, you sat with your back to the door for half an hour, axe in hand, trying to shake the cold from your fingers. Not the outside cold, the kind that sits behind your ribs and whispers that you're prey now. And yet, there's a strange respect, too. Wolves aren't monsters. They're survivors, just like you, trying to get through the winter with what they've got. They take risks, they watch, they wait. In another life, maybe you'd admire them, but not in this one. Not when they're walking circles around your barn like it's already theirs. You keep a tally on the wall now, marks for sightings, tracks, sounds. It's more for your nerves than anything, a way to turn fear into data. 6 sightings in 10 days, 1 confirmed kill, no breaches, yet. You know they'll be back tonight. The moon's full, the sky's clear. You've stacked more wood near the door, double-checked the traps, kept the fire high. You're tired, cold, and ready to defend your little patch of earth with everything you've got. You settle in near the fire, stew bubbling, axe resting against the table, boots still on. The wind howls, but tonight so do you, quietly under your breath. A kind of mockery, or maybe a prayer. You're not afraid. Okay, you're afraid, but you're not running. Let them come. You've survived some ugly nights so far, wind that shook the cabin like it wanted in, cold that burned your lungs when you breathed, stew so bland it made you question the point of having taste buds at all. But tonight is different. Tonight is the kind of storm that makes the earth go quiet beforehand, like even nature's holding its breath. The sky's the wrong colour. The air's still but charged, like it's thinking something terrible. You felt winter before, but this feels like winter is angry. It starts in the early afternoon, just a few flurries. Nothing dramatic, you've learned not to trust gentle beginnings. You bring in extra firewood, check the locks or marks on the barn, move the chickens into the coop's back corner where it's warmer. You patch the window with an old grain sack and say a little prayer to whatever deity handles frostbite. By dusk, the sky goes dark, not because of sunset, but because the snow starts falling in sideways sheets so thick you can't see 5 feet out. Then comes the wind. You thought you'd heard strong wind before, but this is like a living thing. It claws at the walls, pounds the shutters, whistles down the chimney like it wants to scream straight into your fire. The door rattles in its frame, the roof creaks with every gust, and for the first time in weeks, the animals are completely silent. Not even the goat is stirring. They know. You wedge your heaviest chair under the door handle, not because you think it'll help, but because it makes you feel slightly less helpless. Then you sit in your corner of the cabin with every blanket you own piled over your lap, listening to the wind work itself into a frenzy. The fire sputters, smoke curls sideways into the room. The pressure changes so fast your ears pop. This isn't a storm. This is a siege. The cabin is holding for now, but you can feel it shudder with every blast. You know the logs weren't seasoned long enough when you built it. You remember thinking back in October, it'll hold. You regret that confidence now. Somewhere above your head, the rafters groan in protest. You imagine snow piling up on the roof, foot by foot, turning it into a crushing white blanket of doom. You don't sleep, not even closer. You keep feeding the fire, stoking it high, then letting it settle just low enough not to set the chimney on fire. You sip tea gone cold, you hug your knees. You tell yourself it'll pass. Then, in the darkest hour of the night, something snaps. Not metaphorically, literally. A loud, splintering crack from above. The whole cabin shivers. You leap to your feet, heart hammering. It's the roof. It has to be. You grab your lantern and rush up to the loft, boots slipping on the ladder, breath hitching. There it is, a beam near the centre. Bowed under the weight, split right down the middle. You stare at it like it might apologise. It doesn't. You scramble down, grab every extra board you've got, old planks, half-broken crates, the back of a chair, and wedge them against the centre post, trying to brace it. The beam groans. Snow leaks through the seams in the ceiling, dusting the floor like powdered sugar on a disaster cake. You brace it all night, sitting underneath it like a sacrificial offering, daring the roof to fall on your head. It doesn't, but it comes close. By morning, the storm dies down just enough for you to peek outside. The door opens only part way, blocked by snow packed in like concrete. You dig with your hands, then with a pot lid, then with a shovel when you finally find it under the drift. The air burns your nose. The world is white. The barn is barely visible under a mountain of snow. The coop is a lump. You rush to it, heart pounding, and find the chickens alive, if traumatized. The goat looks personally offended. The mule just snorts and turns away. You understand. Back inside, you assess the damage. The beam held, for now, but it's cracked clean through, and you can feel the whole cabin has shifted slightly. One window frame is crooked. The back door won't open. The root cellar hatch is frozen shut. You light another fire and don't move for 2 hours, just sitting there, breathing in smoke and trying not to shake. You've heard tales of bad winters. Everyone has. Some say this winter of 1887 was the worst. Others say it was 1816, the infamous year without a summer, when snow fell in July and people froze to death in their own fields. But if you ask 10 old-timers which storm was worst, you'll get 10 different answers. They don't measure by calendar dates. They measure by what they lost. A barn, a roof, a friend, a child. Every winter has its legend, and now so does yours. There's a debate among historians whether settlers exaggerated these storms in their journals and letters. After all, memory's a slippery thing, and hardship tends to grow larger in hindsight. But there's no exaggeration here. You were there. You heard the roof groan. You heard the wind speak in voices. You saw the world vanish under a blanket of snow so deep it might as well have been the sea. The fire is your only constant now. You've burned through half your wood reserve just in the last 24 hours. You've started calculating how long you can go before you have to dig a new path to the shed, and whether you can get there without the roof caving in on your head while you're gone. But you made it through the worst, you think, and that counts. You patch the roof as best you can with strips of hide and desperate prayers. You reinforce the support beam with a fence post and lash it together with rope made from twisted rags. It's not pretty. It might not even be stable, but it's holding for now. That night you curl up close to the fire, the cracked beam looming above like a broken limb you can't set. You close your eyes and try to dream of spring. Instead, you dream of snow. The morning after the storm, you find yourself sitting on the cabin floor, slowly rubbing bear grease into your cracked knuckles like you're polishing a particularly stubborn piece of old furniture. Your hands are wrecked dry, bleeding in places, the skin stretched too tight from cold and work. The bear grease smell, not great, somewhere between candle wax and wet fur. But it works, so you keep rubbing, like your fingers are made of old leather you're trying to convince to come back to life. You didn't hunt the bear, in case you're wondering. You traded for the fat back in the fall, from a trader who said it came from a black bear he shot near the river. The fat came in a thick, cloudy jar. You rendered it yourself, boiled it down, skimmed the impurities, strained it through muslin. It took hours and stunk up the cabin for a full day. But now, it's your all-purpose miracle. Hand balm, lip salve, fire starter, boot waterproofer, pan grease, leather conditioner, and on desperate days, emergency calories. It might be your best decision of the year. Your bone needles, meanwhile, were a disaster. You carved them yourself from rabbit femurs and chicken wing bones, following rough sketches from an old pamphlet you got in a trade. They worked for a while, then one snapped mid-stitch and the tip stabbed your palm. You've still got the splinter, somewhere under the skin. You've been soaking it in pine tea and muttering threats at it for 3 days. So far, it's winning. That said, you did manage to stitch up your torn coat, and your boot, which cracked right across the sole last week, now has a crude leather patch sewn over it with sinew you dried and twisted yourself. You used to gag at the idea of handling sinew. Now you chew it to soften it, like it's gum made of tendon. Dignity left the building about 3 blizzards ago. Frontier survival isn't just about brute strength, it's finesse too. It's the tiny skills you never knew you'd need. Mending, tanning, weaving, preserving, boiling, stretching, scraping. You become a one-person factory of improvised solutions. Your home is your lab, your repair shop, your tailor's bench, and every small success, every patch that holds, every stitch that doesn't unravel, every tool you cobble together from bone and nail and wire, feels like a tiny win against the avalanche of nature. You've also picked up tricks from the people who really understood this land long before cabins and firewood and axes. The indigenous families who lived here for centuries didn't just survive the winters, They thrived in them. You're using some of their knowledge now, passed along through a handful of conversations, bartered instructions, and quiet observation when you had the chance. Like how you insulate your moccasins with dried grass, crushed and packed tight, then changed every few days to keep moisture out. Or how you made a small smoky fire inside a trench of packed snow, warming your boots with indirect heat instead of risking a full blaze and scorching the soles. Or how you wrapped your hat in rawhide thongs to keep it from flying off in the wind, after learning the hard way that wool alone doesn't stay on in a gale. One of the oldest methods you tried was making pemmican, dried meat pounded into a powder and mixed with melted fat and berries. It's dense, greasy, and tastes like something you might feed to a stubborn mule, but it lasts forever and fills your belly like nothing else. You keep it in small hide bags in the pantry and ration it like it's gold. You'd never admit this out loud, but the longer winter drags on, the more you find yourself craving it. Even the weirdly metallic aftertaste. You remember the old woman who taught you how to make it, or tried to? She watched you mess up 3 batches before nodding once and saying, "You'll get it." Or not. Depends how much you like chewing failure. You liked her. You still think about her when you stir the pot and check your fire. Survival, she said, wasn't about strength. It was about memory. Remembering what works, what doesn't, what hurts, what saves. Of course, not everything translates. You tried making soap goggles from bark once, slits carved into flat panels to reduce snow blindness. They worked until they iced up and you tripped over a snowbank and face-planted directly into your own outhouse trail. That experiment ended in bruises and some light shame, but you don't regret trying. Winter rewards ingenuity, even failed ingenuity. There's a long-standing scholarly debate over how much early settlers adapted from indigenous knowledge versus how much they stubbornly ignored. Some accounts paint pioneers as blank slates, others as arrogant invaders who refused help until frostbite humbled them. The truth, like most things, is messy. Some learned, some died before they had the chance, some just got lucky. You're hoping to be in the learned enough not to die category. You've also started chewing spruce resin. Not for fun, though honestly at this point anything different feels like a holiday. It helps with sore gums, and supposedly it's mildly antiseptic. The texture is somewhere between tree sap and regret. But it keeps your mouth occupied while you pace the cabin, wondering whether you have enough firewood for another week. You pick up little rituals too, not just for warmth or food, but for your head. Every morning you check the bone needles. You rub bear grease into your boots. You inspect your pemmican stash and whisper, "Still ugly, still edible." You run your fingers along the seams you stitched with sinew and nod once, as if to say, "Good enough, ugly as it is." And it is good enough. Not perfect, not even close, but it holds. You've patched things that look beyond fixing. You've warmed things that should have frozen. You've fed yourself with what used to be scraps, and somehow you've kept going. That's what frontier winter is, really. Not glory, not conquest. Just keeping going. You sit by the fire, rubbing grease into your hands, your sleeves stiff with smoke. Your feet wrapped in rabbit-lined moccasins you've mended 6 times. The wind howls again. The goat sneezes. The candle flickers. You smile just a little. Because you're still here. Ugly stitches, bear grease, bone needles, still here. You knew it would come eventually, the need to leave the cabin. Not for wood, not to check the coop or shovel the barn roof, but to actually go somewhere. It starts as a creeping thought. Something small. You're out of salt. Then you realise the lamp oil's low. Then the sack of flour you were pretending wasn't empty finally gives up the game. And so, after weeks of digging into your own dwindling supplies like a squirrel in a bad mood, you accept the bitter truth. Someone's got to make the trip into town. It's a week's walk under normal circumstances. You haven't seen normal since November. You plan for 2 days out, 2 days back, plus a few extra in case the trail decides to punch you in the face. You pack light, too light probably, a sack of pemmican, dried apple slices, a flask of pine tea. You fill the canteen with melted snow, tie extra socks to your belt, and wrap your spare mittens in waxed cloth. Then you turn to the true hero of this terrible expedition, your snowshoes. They're awkward, homemade things, rawhide laced over a bent wood frame that you shaped with steam, and about 7 different swear words. The first time you tried them, you tripped over a pine branch and nearly broke your neck. But after a few weeks of practice and humiliation, you figured them out. Now they're the only reason you're not about to vanish waist-deep into a snowbank and become a sad little human icicle. You strap them on, adjust your pack, and say goodbye to the cabin like you might not see it again. You nod to the goat. She blinks once and goes back to chewing your only semi-dry glove. Classic Ethel, the first hour isn't so bad. The air is still. The trail, such as it is mostly hard-packed snow. You move slow, your feet crunching like drum beats. The woods are quiet, the kind of quiet that feels more like tension than peace. You pass the frost-crusted marker rock you carved back in November, and press your mitten to it like a handshake. Little superstitious? Maybe. But out here, you take all the rituals you can get. By noon, the clouds start to roll in. You were hoping for sun, but winter doesn't care about your hopes. You pick up the pace. The snowshoes help, but every step takes effort. It's like trying to walk while dragging stubborn ghosts behind you. You think about turning back. Then you think about having to eat plain-boiled pine needles again. You keep walking. By nightfall, you reach the halfway shelter, a crumbling old trapper's lean-to that someone built years ago and never claimed. You've used it before. You hope it's still standing. It is, barely. The roof's half gone, but the windbreak still works. You hunker down inside, light a tiny fire, and eat a chunk of pemmican that tastes like regret mixed with meatloaf. You roll up in your blanket, cover your face, and try not to dream of wolves. They say travelling in winter sharpens the senses. You believe it. You wake up at every sound, branches cracking, snow sliding off trees, something that might have been a fox or your own panicked heartbeat. You don't sleep so much as blink slowly in the dark until it's morning. On the second day, the trail gets worse, drifts up to your knees, wind slicing sideways, your scarf freezes to your face. You lose feeling in your right thumb and have to walk with your hand shoved inside your coat like Napoleon with better priorities. You take breaks behind trees, not for rest, but to cry silently into your mittens because this is officially miserable. Then, just before sunset, you see it. Smoke, thinned and grey against the white sky, curling above the tree line. Town, civilization, a few clustered cabins and the general store, your holy grail. You nearly run the last quarter of a mile, stumble into the snowy yard, and push open the door to a blast of warm air that hits your face like a hug made of soup and sanity. Inside, it's glowing. Oil lamps, a wood stove, shelves, lined with things you haven't seen in months. Salt, flour, beans, soap. You stare like it's a museum exhibit. You half expect angels to start singing from the rafters. The shopkeeper squints at you from behind the counter. You look like something that got chewed up and spit back out. You smile through cracked lips. You should see the other guy. You tread carefully one of your deer hides, some jerky, a bone knife you made. You ration your resources like a miser at an auction. You leave with a small bundle, flour, a tin of lard, a few candles, some coffee beans wrapped in brown paper like a sacred gift. You know you can't carry much, not on snowshoes, not on this trail. You spend one night in town, sleeping in the corner of someone's barn with two other travellers and a goat that's not as friendly as yours. The bed is straw, the blanket is borrowed. But there's a roof and warmth and voices. You listen to stories. One man's barn collapsed. Another lost his whole harvest to mice. Someone's cousin nearly burned down his cabin trying to make whiskey out of molasses. Misery loves company, and here, company is something close to salvation. The next morning you head back. The return trip is slower, heavier. The pack pulls on your shoulders, the wind's worse. Your legs ache like they've aged 20 years overnight. But your steps are sure. You know this trail now. You know how the snow curves near the ridge, how the wind shifts near the creek bed. You sing under your breath to stay focused. Nonsense songs, frontier hymns, a butchered version of something your mother used to hum. The lean-to offers no warmth, but you make do. You brew weak coffee with melted snow. You stare into the fire like it might tell you something wise. It doesn't, but it doesn't go out either. By the time you reach your cabin, it's almost dusk, smoke still curling from the chimney. The animals are fine. The goat even greets you with something resembling affection. You step inside, unload your pack, and sink to the floor. You made it. You're exhausted, frozen, aching. But you've got flour, salt, coffee, a candle or two. It's more than supplies. It's hope in paper wrappers. Outside, the snow starts falling again. Inside, the coffee brews. And for the first time in weeks, the cabin smells like something other than smoke, sweat, and despair. It smells like survival. That night, you sit beside the fire with your legs stretched out and your socks half off, just enough to let the heat kiss your thawing toes. The cabin is quiet, aside from the crackling logs and the occasional shuffle from the goat who's wedged herself contentedly near the hearth like she owns the place. You sip from your tin mug, real coffee, not pine needle tea, not hot water with wishful thinking, but honest-to-goodness bitter glorious coffee. And for a moment, you let yourself forget how badly your legs hurt. Then you remember the fiddle. It's leaning in the corner where you left it months ago, under a ragged cloth to keep the dust off, waiting patiently like an old friend you forgot to write back. You haven't touched it since before the first snow. Back then, you still thought you might have visitors this winter. A neighbour or two, maybe some laughter, maybe a small gathering where music would feel less like a performance and more like medicine. That didn't happen. But you reach for the fiddle now anyway. The wood is dry, the strings hum with tension. You pluck one gently just to see if it remembers your touch. It does, sort of. You tighten the tuning pegs, adjust the bridge, and drag the bow across the rosin block, which is cracked but still usable. Then you pull the bow across the strings. The sound is rough, scratchy, uneven. The kind of noise that would make birds drop from the sky and coyotes question their life choices. But you keep going. You play anyway. Because music, even bad music, breaks the silence. It pushes back the walls a little. And in winter, that's enough. You start with simple songs, old reels and waltzes, the kind that don't ask for too much finesse. Your fingers are stiff, your timing is off, and you can't remember the second half of any tune. Still, something about the rhythm settles you. Your shoulders drop, your jaw unclenches, you feel your heartbeat start to match the sway of the bow. The animals stir, the goat lifts her head and blinks at you like she's reconsidering her life choices. The chickens rustle in the corner, feathers puffed, heads cocked like tiny critics. You ignore them and keep playing. In frontier cabins, music was never a luxury, it was a survival tactic. When the wind howled and the dark lasted 15 hours a night, people clung to whatever sounds they could make. Fiddles, flutes, banjos if they had them. Bones and spoons if they didn't. Even just singing, together or alone. Anything to keep the silence from crawling under your skin. You remember stories of families who'd gather by candlelight and pass instruments around. Someone would play, someone else would dance or clap, and for a while they'd forget the snow piling outside. You also remember a neighbour who carved a working whistle out of a deer bone, and insisted it was a flute. It was not. It sounded like a dying bird in a metal can, but he played it with pride every night and claimed it kept the wolves away. Honestly, it might have. There's a debate among old-timers about what song best suits a storm. Some say slow ballads soothe the cabin. Others swear by fast reels to stir the blood and keep the body warm. One man you met claimed that playing Irish jigs during snowfall kept his sourdough starter alive. You're not saying he was right, but your starter did die shortly after you stopped playing music last month. Coincidence? You don't think so. Music on the frontier wasn't always melodic either. Sometimes it was improvised, knocking spoons against a tin cup, tapping boots on the floor, humming into a jar to hear the vibration. You've done all of that. You once played percussion with 2 firewood logs and a near-frozen potato. You made a rhythm, called it art, and decided it counted. Because it did. Because when the snow walls you in, and the world forgets your name, anything you create becomes sacred. Tonight, you switch from playing to humming, a lullaby you barely remember from childhood. The words are gone. But the tune sticks. You hum as you ladle out stew, as you feed the fire, as you clean the spoon with a rag that no longer resembles its original colour or texture. The hum follows you, warms the air, seeps into the floorboards. You realise it's the first time you've made a sound that wasn't cursing or shivering in days. Later you experiment with shadows. You hold your hand against the wall, twist your fingers, and cast a bird shape in the flickering firelight. Then a wolf. Then something that's supposed to be a rabbit, but looks more like a melting toad. You laugh once. Just once. Quiet and surprised. Shadow puppets were a big thing for settlers with kids. Not everyone had books, not everyone could read. But hands and firelight were free, and a little imagination went a long way. You've seen kids transfixed by a silhouette on a wall like it was the greatest play ever written. Now you're here, alone, making your own show and pretending the audience isn't a goat and some unimpressed poultry. You keep the candle burning longer than usual tonight, just for company. You play one more song, a quiet one full of long, aching notes. You close your eyes and let it drift. You imagine someone listening, maybe from the woods, maybe from another cabin down the ridge, maybe no one, But the sound is out there now, riding the cold, slicing through the dark. You pack up the fiddle, careful with the bow, you wrap it in cloth and tuck it back into its corner. You bank the fire, check the windows, and pull your blankets close. The cabin doesn't feel bigger, but it feels less alone. And sometimes, in the heart of winter, that's the best kind of music. It starts with a tightening in your back, then a cramp low in your belly. At first, you think it's the stew, or the coffee, or just another weird punishment your body's decided to throw your way for surviving this long. You shift in your chair, stretch, drink water, chew a sliver of ginger root that tastes like burning bark and hope it passes. But then it doesn't. It sharpens instead, tense, rhythmic, unmistakable, and suddenly you realise this is not just a stomachache. This is labour. That's right. Tonight, in the middle of the coldest week of the year, with snow piled halfway up your windows and the fire barely keeping up with the draft through the south wall, someone is about to be born. It's not your baby, let's get that clear. It's hers, the young woman who showed up at your door 2 nights ago wrapped in a quilt and looking like death with a heartbeat. Her name is Clara, she's 18 and very, very pregnant. She'd walked miles, barefoot in old boots, from a nearby homestead after her husband took the only horse and disappeared in a drunken storm panic. She didn't even knock, just collapsed on your porch, belly first, hands blue, mouth whispering, something about needing shelter. You dragged her inside, fed her broth, wrapped her in every blanket you owned, and hoped the baby would wait. The baby did not wait. Now she's crouched in your only bed, face pale, hair plastered to her cheeks, eyes wild. You hold her hand because it's all you know how to do. You've never delivered a baby. You've never even seen one born unless you count livestock, which, come to think of it, might be the most relevant experience you've got. You boil water because that's what people do in every story you've ever heard. You tear old linen into strips. You heat a rock and wrap it in flannel to press against her lower back. You stroke her hair and say the only thing you can think of, you've got this. Just breathe. She doesn't scream. Not exactly. It's more like growling, deep, primal, ancient. The kind of sound that makes your spine want to crawl out of your body and hide under the wheel. The cabin feels too small for this much pain, this much life. And outside Bowl, of course, it starts to snow, because of course it does. You try to remember everything anyone ever told you about childbirth. Keep the mother warm, don't pull the baby, watch for the shoulder ears, cut the cord after it stops pulsing, use boiled thread, don't panic, definitely don't faint. You recite these like a mantra while Clara clutches your arm hard enough to bruise and breathes like she's about to explode. It takes hours, long, painful, slow-motion hours during which you forget to eat, forget to drink, and forget that the cabin exists beyond the radius of this bed, this woman, this moment. Your fire dies down, you feed it blindly, your goat bleats in the corner, sensing something is different. Even the chickens are silent. And then, just as dawn starts to bleed grey across the window pane, the baby arrives. There's no time for awe, not yet. You're too focused on getting the cord tied, making sure it's breathing, rubbing its back with the towel you boiled only an hour earlier. It gasps, hiccups, then screams, a piercing, healthy, furious cry that cuts straight through the exhaustion. Clara sobs, not from pain anymore, just from relief. You wrap the baby, tiny, red and loud, in the last clean scrap of wool you own, and place her in Clara's arms. She smiles, weak but real, and mouths thank you before falling asleep, cradling her newborn like the last good thing in a broken world. You sit back against the wall and exhale for what feels like the first time in days. There are debates still about what childbirth was really like on the frontier. Some records paint it as brutal and deadly, with mothers often lost to infection or hemorrhage. Others say it was routine, dangerous, yes, but survivable, especially with help from other women, midwives, herbalists, even the occasional doctor if you lived close enough to town. But out here, snowed in with no one for miles, you become the midwife, the herbalist, the everything. There's a fringe account you once read about a woman who delivered her own twins alone in a blizzard using just a mirror and a belt. You remember scoffing at it. Now you wonder if she was just the only one who wrote it down. For hours the cabin feels different. Warmer, softer somehow, like the baby changed the temperature of the air just by existing. She sleeps soundly in Clara's arms while you rebuild the fire, clean the bed or boil the water again, and try not to let the shaking in your hands show you're not weak, just overwhelmed and exhausted. and proud in a way you didn't expect. Later, when Clara wakes, she asks you what time it is. You glance outside. The light's brighter now. It's morning, probably. You shrug. Wintertime, you say. Somewhere between too early and not early enough. She laughs, a hoarse little thing that still carries joy. You make her tea. She names the baby Hope. It's perfect. Hope in a blizzard. Hope in a patched-up bed under a leaking roof. Hope, born in the dead of winter. You're not religious, not exactly. But you wrap your fingers around that name like it's a coal ember you don't want to let go cold. You tuck another log on the fire. You open the shutters just a crack and let in the faintest sliver of sun. You stare at that tiny sleeping face and think, okay, we keep going, not because it's easy, but because now you've got company. A week after the birth, the silence starts to feel different. Not the normal snowy kind you've grown used to. The hush of snow falling, wind through a tree, the creak of the cabin settling, but a heavier quiet. A stillness that seems to press in from every side. The kind that makes you lean forward and ask, wait, where is everybody? It's been weeks since you've seen a visitor. That part's not new. Isolation is winter's default setting. But you'd grown used to little things. Smoke on the horizon, distant echoes, a raven circling overhead with a scrap of cloth in its beak. Human signs, proof that the world hadn't disappeared under all this snow. Now, nothing. You haven't seen a trail in days, not even animal prints. The road to town is gone again, buried under a fresh drift that reached halfway up your barn. You tried sending a signal, smoke during the clearest part of the morning, 3 long puffs. A call out that everyone understands. But no smoke answered back, no figures on snowshoes, no mailbag slung over a frozen saddle, just empty sky and too much time to think. Mail was never guaranteed on the frontier, you know that. There are weeks when the post doesn't come, and months when it only reaches a handful of families. But usually there's something. A letter from back east, a package wrapped in oilcloth, a bundle of newsprint so old the ink's smudged into ghost words. Anything to remind you there's a world outside these woods. But now the silence is turning brittle. It has an edge like it's daring you to hope. You check the trail again the next day. You climb to the ridge just past the stream, breath burning your lungs, eyes squinting into the wind. Still nothing. No fresh snowshoe marks, no sled tracks, no boot prints leading to your door. You pause on that ridge and just listen. And that's when it hits you. It's not quiet. It's cut off. You return to the cabin, heart tight in your chest. Clara notices, of course. She watches you from her chair by the fire, baby Hope tucked against her chest, swaddled in layers of wool and worn-out cotton. Clara doesn't say anything. She just gives you a look, half worry, half warning, and you both understand it. If something happens out here, you're on your own. The mail route, when it ran, came through the pass once every 10 days, give or take. A man on a sturdy pony, bundled up like a scarecrow and twice as determined. He carried everything, news, letters, tiny packages, maybe a tin of sweets if someone back east was feeling generous. You knew his name. Hank, always smiling even when his beard was frozen solid. Hank hasn't come. You try not to think about why. There's always debate among settlers about how isolated is too isolated. Some say being a full day's ride from town builds character. Others say it builds graves. The mail was supposed to bridge that gap. And when it didn't, well, people found other ways. Smoke signals, piled rocks, crossed stick-its on trail markers. You've seen it all, you've used it all, but it only works if someone else is still watching. Right now, it feels like no one is. You dig out the mailbag you've kept tucked under your bed. It's not official or anything, just a canvas sack you once used for storing cornmeal. You've stuffed it with old letters, some you've already read so many times they've lost their scent. 1 from your brother, 2 from your mother, a few from neighbours, scratchered notes asking for flour, offering jerky, warning about wolves. You read them again, hoping they'll feel like company. They don't. Clara asks if there's ink. There is, barely. The bottle's frozen shut, but you thaw it by the fire and find just enough to scratch out a note. She writes a letter to her sister back in St. Louis. 1 page, careful script. She asks if the baby can be baptised come spring. She doesn't mention her husband. You don't ask. You write one too. Not to anyone in particular, just a letter to whoever picks it up next, a record. You describe the baby, the storm, the cracked beam in the roof. You include a little drawing of the goat, with an apology for how bad it looks. You fold the letters, tie them with twine, and place them by the door, where the mail pouch always used to hang, just in case. Just as to pretend, there's a fringe theory among historians that the postal service out here wasn't about communication, it was about sanity. that the idea of connection was more important than actual contact. People believed they weren't alone, and that belief helped them survive. You get it now. You understand why someone would keep writing letters even when no one's reading them. Because silence gets loud after a while. It echoes. That night the wind picks up again. You add another log to the fire, you glance at the door. Still no knock. You think about Hank, bundled up, trudging through at a whiteout just to bring someone a note that says, "We're thinking of you." You wonder if he's okay. You wonder if he turned back. You wonder if he didn't. In the morning, Clara finds you sitting on the stoop, staring down the trail with a blanket over your shoulders and your coffee gone cold in your lap. She hands you another letter. This one's to Hope, written in tiny script, barely legible. She says, "For some day." You nod and tuck it into the bag. No one comes that day, or the next, but the bag stays by the door, just in case. The cold has a way of creeping in places it doesn't belong. It finds the cracks in your boots, the space between your gloves and sleeves, the rim of your collar, the tips of your ears. But eventually it goes deeper, into the joints, the lungs, the blood. It lives there now. You've stopped being surprised by how much you ache, how stiff your fingers are in the morning, how slow your knees bend when you rise from your chair. Everything's slower now, heavier, and you're starting to learn just how much damage the cold can really do. Your feet go first, they always do. You've done everything right. Layers, dry socks, insulated boots stuffed with grass, even had rubbed bear grease on your toes before walking out. But still, when you come back from chopping wood and peel off your boots, your toes are pale, waxy, a little too numb. You wait, hoping the feeling will come back quickly. It doesn't. You know what to look for. You've heard the stories, the colour changes, the tingling, the way numbness isn't always good news. It can be the body giving up. You've seen frostbite before, on your neighbour's hand last winter. He didn't notice until his fingertips turned black. Ended up losing the pinky. He joked about it later, called it his winter tax. You didn't laugh then. You're not laughing now. You sit by the fire and rub your toes until your knuckles burn. The colour comes back, slowly. One turns redder than the others. It hurts like hell, that's good. That means it's alive. You wrap them in drywall and swear to be more careful. You last 3 days before it happens again. But it's not just frostbite. It's the chilblains too. Those weird red welts that crop up on your thighs, your wrists, your cheeks. Not quite frostbite, but close cousins. They itch, swell, sting when touched. You scratch them raw in your sleep and wake up with blood on your sleeves. Clara notices. She hands you some old ointment she packed before leaving home. A jar of thick yellow salve that smells like vinegar and pine tar. You don't ask what's in it, you just use it. Then there's what the old folks used to call winter legs. It's not a medical term, not really, just a phrase whispered between people who'd been through more than one hard season. Your legs start to feel like logs. Not just heavy, foreign, like they don't belong to you anymore. Like your brain sends signals and they arrive late, or not at all. You drag yourself through the snow, and when you sit down, your knees throb with something that's part cold, part fatigue, and part hopelessness. You mention it to Clara one night. She nods like she's heard it before. "My grandmother had that," she says. Said her legs felt like they were full of river stones. Didn't go away until the spring thaw. You wonder quietly if all of you will come back when the snow melts, or if some parts will stay in winter forever. You do stretches now, awkward lunges in the middle of the cabin floor while the baby watches from Clara's lap with wide, suspicious eyes. You lift your knees, rotate your ankles, slap your thighs. You look like a deranged scarecrow doing interpretive dance, but it helps. A little. There's an old remedy for winter aches, soaking your feet in warm water with mustard powder. You try it once, it makes your feet feel like they're on fire, and the smell makes the goat sneeze herself into a corner. Still, you feel better afterward, so you do it again and again until you run out of mustard. Then you go back to bear grease and stubbornness. The cold messes with your brain too, makes you forget things. You lose your hat inside the cabin. You call Clara by the wrong name. You put a pot on to boil and find it the next morning, scorched dry and smelling like burnt regret. At first you blame the lack of sleep, then the stress. Then you start wondering if this is just what people become in winter, less sharp, more faded. Like everything else, dulled by frost. There are accounts from early frontier journals that speak of this phenomenon, how people would start seeing things, hearing voices, forgetting simple tasks. It wasn't always starvation or isolation that broke them, sometimes it was just the cold. Day after day of never being warm enough, never resting well, never moving freely. It chips away at you, like ice on a roof beam, till one day it snaps. You're not snapping, not yet, but you're definitely creaking. You've developed a little routine. Wake up and check your toes, stretch your legs, rub salve on the chilblains, and recite the days of the week aloud, just to see if you remember them. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes it takes until Wednesday to remember what Monday was for. You laugh at yourself when you can. Other times, you just shake your head and stir the fire. Clara's doing better somehow. She's tired, sure. The baby cries, the nights are long. But she's strong, quietly so. She rubs her own cracked hands with lard. She stretches too. She hums songs to hope, strange, winding melodies from her childhood that sound like wind through tree branches. You try to hum along. You're always a little flat. One night you take your socks off and stare at your feet. The skin's blotchy, red in some places, pale in others. One toenail looks like it's considering quitting. You flex your toes and wince, still alive, still yours. You count that as victory. There's a moment just before bed when you look at yourself in the mirror. Well, the polished tin you call a mirror, and barely recognise the face staring back. Chapped lips, cracked cheeks, beard like a snowdrift. You raise your eyebrows and make a stupid face just to prove you still can. Outside, the wind has calmed for now. Inside, your legs ache, your hands are stiff, and your joints pop like old wood. But you're not broken. Not yet. It begins subtly, the running out of everything. Not all at once with some dramatic clatter, just a quiet, steady erosion. First it's the flour, then the salt. The sugar jar has maybe a teaspoon rattling at the bottom, and it clumps when you shake it. Your last onion sprouts a pale green curl and collapses in on itself like it's given up. Even the coffee, sacred as it is, has been reduced to one final scoop that you keep stashed in a tin behind the firewood, like you're hiding treasure from pirates. You don't talk about it. You just know it's there, and that one day it won't be. Clara's taken to stretching meals with anything remotely edible. Birch bark gets scraped and boiled. Stale bread crusts are soaked in water and mashed into what she calls pudding, with a straight face and only the faintest hint of sarcasm. You boil broth from bones long since picked clean. Even the goat milk's thin now. And Ethel has started giving you side-eye every time you milk her, like she knows you're asking too much. Hope, for her part, is doing better than expected. You've rationed Clara's last bit of oats for porridge, and the baby takes it with grim determination, like she already understands that frontier cuisine is more about survival than flavour. She's still too little to notice what's missing, but you're not. You notice everything that's missing. You start counting meals backward, not by what you've eaten, but by what you won't eat again until spring. Last apple? Gone last week. Last candle? Burned halfway through last night. Last decent hunk of meat? Cooked it 3 days ago and stretched the drippings into gravy so thin it could have passed for soup in a more optimistic household. And then comes the moment when you realise what you're eating is what you once swore you'd never touch. Rats. Well, technically just a rat. One scrawny half-frozen thing that scurried into the trap near the pantry looking more confused than malicious. You hesitate. Of course you do. You stare at it for a long time. But you've been hungry before. Now you're starving, not in the dramatic, emaciated sense, not yet, but in the quiet, creeping way where your hands shake before dinner, and your thoughts keep drifting toward the sound of chewing, even if it's just the goat gnawing on a log. You skin the rat, boil it in snow water, and toss in a handful of wild thyme you dried back in the fall. You serve it like stew, you call it stew, you don't mention what it is. Clara eats in silence. She knows, there's no shame, not any more. The cold strips that away. Hunger burns it. You've heard of people eating their boot leather? Bark, lard straight from the jar. In the 1840s, one group of mountain settlers reportedly boiled their belts. You remember reading that and thinking it was myth. Now, you eye your belt like it owes you something. You make soup from the remaining pickling brine and a cracked potato. It tastes like salt water and desperation. Clara calls it frontier bisque with a crooked smile. You both laugh. Then you go to bed with your stomach still growling. Some mornings you wake up dizzy. Your hands tremble when you feed the fire. You can feel your muscles thinning, not disappearing but giving notice, like they're thinking of relocating. Your knees click louder. Your back feels hollow. You bend slower, like you're underwater. There's a scholarly debate, naturally, about what starvation looked like on the frontier. Some historians insist settlers were resourceful enough to avoid it. Others, drawing from letters and family journals, paint a grimmer picture: men chewing rawhide, women hiding the last crumbs from their children. One journal from 1871 described eating boiled cattail roots for a month, followed by 3 days of fasting. That man survived. Barely. You find a stash of dried beans behind a loose floorboard you'd forgotten about. It's like discovering gold. You don't shout, you don't cheer, you just sit there holding the bag, breathing like someone pulled you out of a frozen river. You cook half that night and hide the rest in a tin marked buttons. Later that week you melt snow to make broth, and there's a pine needle floating in your mug. You sip it anyway. It tastes like bark, but it's warm. That's the trade-off now. Everything tastes like something it shouldn't. But as long as it's hot, it counts as a win. You're not alone in this. Clara's face is leaner, her arms thinner. She doesn't complain. She doesn't need to. The way she eyes the baby's food before handing it over says everything. You catch her skipping meals, claiming she's just not hungry. You don't call her out, you just do the same thing the next day. You take inventory like it's a religious ritual. 3 eggs, a handful of jerky, 4 hard biscuits, half a cup of cracked corn. You don't write it down, you just count it again, then again, like maybe the numbers will change if you stare long enough. There are fringe survival guides that claim you can live on broth alone for weeks, that you can train the body to need less, that fasting builds clarity and endurance. You decide anyone who wrote that probably had a full pantry and a warm fire, or at least better luck. By the end of the week, even the goat looks hungrier. Ethel's milk is barely a trickle, and she noses the feed barrel like she's hoping something new appeared. You start tossing her bits of dried leaves and last summer's bark. She doesn't look thrilled, but she eats. Like the rest of you, she's adjusted her standards. That night, you eat the last egg. You boil it gently, split it with Clara, and pretend it's enough. It's not, but it's the act that matters. You both eat, you both thank each other, and you both sleep a little lighter knowing you shared the last good thing. And then, you wait, because that's all you can do now. Wait for a thaw, a sound, a knock on the door, a shape on the horizon carrying a sack of hope. Until then, you chew slow and breathe slower. And pray spring isn't late this year. The first sound you hear is a crack, sharp and wet, like a bone snapping underfoot. At first you think it's just the fire, or maybe Ethel bumping something over in the barn again. But then you hear it again. Not inside, outside, something huge splitting open, the kind of sound that tells you winter's finally started to lose its grip. You step out onto the porch, breath caught in your chest, and there it is, the first drip. It's subtle, pathetic even, a single inconsistent drip of meltwater falling from the eaves of your cabin. But to you, it might as well be a choir of angels singing hallelujah in thermal underwear. You watch it hit the snowbank below with a little puff of steam and a sad hiss. 1 drop becomes 2, then a slow, almost steady trickle. The sun, weak and milky through the clouds, is just warm enough to start doing its work. And just like that, the thaw has begun. Of course, the thaw is not the relief people like to think it is. It's not a clean, cinematic melting into green fields and chirping birds. No. Out here, spring arrives like a drunk guest at a funeral, loud, messy, disruptive, and several weeks too early. The snow doesn't just melt, it gives up, in waves. Heavy slabs fall from the roof and hit the ground with a force that shakes the floorboards. Icicles drop like spears. The path from the cabin to the barn turns into a sludge trap that eats your boots and threatens to keep them. The air smells different now. Earthy. Sour, like wet rot and thawed-out secrets. You step around the corner of the cabin and spot what looks like the half-frozen remains of last summer's latrine pile, now seeping out of the snow with all the charm of an exhumed scandal. Great. Everything buried is coming back. The chickens are thrilled, by the way. They strut around like royalty, pecking at fresh patches of uncovered ground and chasing worms with the kind of joy you wish you could bottle. Ethel is less enthused. Her hooves keep getting stuck in the mud, and she gives you a look that says, "You brought me into this world, now fix it." Clara stays inside for the most part. The baby's fussy with the temperature shifts, hot 1 hour, cold the next. The sound of the roof cracking unsettles her, but she's healing. Her colour's better, her voice stronger. She jokes again. You notice her starting to hum more, lullabies half finished, melodies with no end, drifting through the cabin like smoke. Then the flood comes. It starts slowly. The snow on the higher ridge melts first. You can see the dark lines forming like veins down the mountainside. Then one morning you step outside and hear rushing water where silence used to be, the stream near your root cellar. Once a polite trickle is now a raging brown torrent full of ice chunks and tree limbs. By afternoon it's over the banks. That root cellar you worked so hard to insulate, gone. Well, not gone, but soaked. You wade through ankle-deep sludge to open the hatch, only to find jars floating like sad, forgotten treasures. The good pickles, the dried apples, the jerky you were saving for spring, all drowned. You salvage what you can, but most of it's lost. Mould, cracked lids. Everything smells faintly of defeat and vinegar. Then there's the cabin itself. The front corner starts to sink. Not fast, just a slow tilt that makes your stew pan slide off the table one night. You crawl under the house to check the supports and find one post completely rotted through from where runoff pooled. You wedge in a rock and some boards and pray. You don't have enough wood or energy for proper repairs yet. So you prop and wait. The debate among historians is whether settlers feared the cold more, or the thaw that followed. Winter killed slowly, sure, but spring had a way of sweeping the table clean in one wild hand. You read about a man who survived a whole season of blizzards only to drown in his own flooded pasture. Another who lost an entire cabin when the hillside it sat on turned into soup. At least the cold has rules. The thaw doesn't care. You hike up the ridge one day to check the pass. It's still snowed in, but you can see signs of change. Cracks in the drifts, patches of exposed brush, animal tracks returning. The forest smells awake again. Not friendly, but aware. You hear a woodpecker, a real one. Not in your dreams. You nearly weep. And then finally, after weeks of melted snow and mud and the steady collapse of your remaining patience, you spot something on the horizon. A figure. Just one. Trudging slowly across the rise near the old maple stand. Your heart stumbles. You watch for a long time, not even breathing. When the figure gets close enough, you see it's Hank, the mailman. He looks like hell. Frozen beard, limp in one leg, but his eyes are bright. He smiles like he knows exactly how close he came to becoming a cautionary tale. You rush out to meet him and help carry his battered satchel the rest of the way. Inside, you give him coffee, stew, half a biscuit you were saving. He hands you 3 letters and a package wrapped in burlap and tied with twine. A note from your brother, a prayer from your mother, a parcel of seeds from someone you once helped in town. You don't open them right away, you just hold them. The thaw took a lot, but it gave something back too. Proof that the world didn't forget you. That your name still echoes beyond the trees. That there's a road even under all this mess, and someone walked it just to say you're still here. And that's worth more than a root cellar full of pickles. You open the first letter slowly, fingers trembling, not from cold this time, but from something warmer, stranger. Hope with a pulse. The paper is soft from the journey, corners damp, ink slightly blurred. You unfold it and see your brother's handwriting, crooked but familiar. The words are simple, careful, he's alive, he's safe. He made it through his own brutal winter on the other side of the mountain. Lost a few chickens, lost a friend, gained a new appreciation for canned peaches. He says he'll come to find you when the pass clears. Won't let another season pass without a visit, he promises. You believe him, mostly. The second letter is from your mother. Not much longer than a shopping list. She never was one for flowery words, but in that neat script are tiny anchors, reminders of normalcy. The garden bloomed late, she says. The church roof leaked. Your uncle's cow had twins. She ends with, stay warm, don't forget who you are. You reread that line 4 times, as if it might change under your gaze. It doesn't, but it plants something inside you anyway. Then there's the parcel. You unwrap it slowly, the twine stubborn, the burlap stiff with old moisture. Inside, 3 small sacks of heirloom seeds, each carefully labelled in your neighbour's handwriting. Beans, squash, corn, the trifecta. You hold them like relics. These aren't just seeds, they're a plan, a challenge, a reason to keep the soil alive. You sit there for a long time, letters on the table, seeds in your hand, coffee steaming faintly beside you. The fire crackles. The baby coos from Clara's lap, and for a moment the cabin feels like a place meant to be lived in, not just endured. Outside, the thaw continues its chaotic opera. Water drips, snow sloughs off the trees. The world is soggy and loud. Patches of mud swallow your boots when you try to check the fence line, which looks like it was hit by a drunken moose. You make a mental note to fix it, then immediately forget the note because your boot is now stuck and you're half sinking like a confused scarecrow in a peat bog. But the green is coming. Not yet, but soon. You start clearing the garden patch, such as it is, just a rough rectangle of earth beneath the hill, once tilled, now more swamp than soil. You dig with your boots first, then with a rusted spade you unearth from behind the barn. Every inch of mud clings like it has abandonment issues, but you keep going, because these seeds need something to believe in, and maybe so do you. Clara watches from the porch wrapped in a blanket, baby pressed against her chest. You think it's early enough? She asks. You look at the sky, the trees, the weeping remains of winter. Too early, too late, who knows? She smiles. Sounds about right. You mark your planting spots with sticks. You dream of squash the size of your head and beans that climb past the eaves. You know it won't happen like that. But the dreaming is the point. After all these months of making do, now you get to make something. The days stretch longer. You forget to light the lantern until after supper. You crack the windows once or twice just to let in the smell of thawed dirt and the sound of dripping trees. One morning, a robin lands on the fence post and sings a song so piercingly hopeful it makes your throat tighten. You start fixing things, the cabin roof first, then the barn door hinge. You patch the chicken coop where something tried to claw through. You gather all the bits and pieces winter left behind, bent nails, fallen branches, the warped remnants of a crate, and sort them like treasure. You'll need all of it. There's always something to mend. Even the root cellar gets a second chance. You haul out the drowned jars, dump the ruined food, scrub the stone walls with vinegar and hot water. You lay new planks, line the shelves. Clara helps when she can, baby strapped to her back, sleeves rolled to the elbow, looking more like a pioneer than anyone you've ever met. The thaw reveals more than damage. It shows the signs of life you forgot were there. A tuft of green moss on the north side of the cabin. A crocus pushing through the muddy slope behind the outhouse. You crouch beside it for 10 minutes, just watching it exist. You take out the fiddle again, this time not to fight the silence, but to fill it. You play in the doorway while the chickens scratch at the fresh earth and the goat naps in the sun like she's suddenly civilized. Clara joins in with humming, then lyrics. The baby flails her arms, possibly in joy, possibly in protest. Either way, the cabin echoes with sound again. Music with warmth in it. There's still snow in the shade, still frost some mornings, but the balance has shifted. The cold doesn't own the days anymore, it rents them, and it's behind on payment. You remember a fringe theory from an old folk almanac, that if you plant your first seeds on the third night after the last frost and wear something red while doing it, the crops will come in stronger. Total nonsense probably, but 3 nights from now you plan to be in that garden, wearing your one red flannel shirt, planting corn like it's sacred, because maybe it is. You start to write again, not just survival notes, but thoughts, ideas, stories. Letters you might send or might never send. You write to your brother, your mother, yourself. You write poems badly. You draw tiny sketches in the corners of the pages, goats, fiddle strings, a robin with its beak wide open. This, you realise, is the other side of survival. Not just breathing and eating and not dying, but coming back after. Making meaning from the mess. Making joy out of what's left. Building again. And so you do. Each small task is a step towards spring. Each handful of turned soil, each mended plank, each chord on the fiddle. Even the bruises feel different now, earned, not inflicted. You survived winter. Now you plant. Spring does not arrive all at once. It lingers, teases, stalls. You wake to mornings that feel like winter has slipped back in, whispering threats through the window cracks, turning the water bucket to ice again just to remind you who's still boss. Then by noon, the sun's out, the snow's steaming, and you're peeling off layers like you overdressed for a funeral and someone told a joke. This time of year, the world forgets what temperature it's supposed to be. Still, you plant. It starts with the beans. You press each seed into the dirt like you're making a deal. Clara watches from the porch, the baby on her lap, swaddled in a blanket so big she looks like a puff pastry. You talk to the soil while you work, muttering of encouragement, warnings, and possibly mild threats. Grow, or else, you say. Please, you add. Just in case the dirt listens better when you're polite. Next, the corn. You space them out carefully, remembering everything you ever read or thought you read about how close they should be. You wear your red flannel shirt like the almanac told you, and you don't care if it's superstition. You've survived on stranger beliefs. You've held on to hope when it looked like a frozen rat in a stew pot. The squash go in last, seeds spaced in soft mounds at the edge of the clearing where they'll have room to sprawl like lazy royalty. You picture their vines growing long and wild, curling around fence posts and creeping toward the chicken coop like green invaders. You hope they make it that far. You hope you make it that far. Spring is fragile. More fragile than winter in a way. Winter is honest, cold, brutal, unforgiving. Spring is all promises. Little green shoots you fall in love with and then lose to one late frost. You check the sky more often now, paranoid and hopeful. You carry extra blankets out at night to lay over the garden beds like a nervous parent tucking in a child. Your hands are stained with dirt. Your knees are bruised from kneeling. Your back aches from bending. You love every minute of it. The baby's first laugh comes one warm afternoon when Clara's hanging laundry, and you're hammering a new fence post in with a chunk of driftwood. Hope watches you wobble off balance and nearly fall into the chicken trough, and something about your complete lack of grace sends her into hysterics. A bubbling, gurgling laugh that fills the entire yard with something that's been missing all season. Joy without conditions. Clara smiles, but her eyes go glassy. Like the sound broke open something inside her that had been holding together with string. She scoops Hope up and holds her close, whispering something you can't hear. You don't ask. Some things aren't meant to be shared out loud. You build a clothesline, dig a better drainage ditch, and finally repair the loose shutter that clattered all winter like an anxious ghost. There's still snow on the far ridge, still patches of ice in the shaded corners of the woodshed. But the grass is coming in, the creek is running clear, and you've started to believe, just a little, that the worst really is behind you. Hank returns, this time with another parcel, more seeds, and a letter from someone you haven't heard from in years. An old friend. The letter is short but full of news. Their barn burned, but no one was hurt. They're planting again. They ask if you're still up in the hills. You smile. You think about replying. You will, eventually. There's a scholarly debate, of course there is, about what the end of winter truly meant for frontier settlers. Was it the first thaw? The first harvest? The first moment they could stop rationing the food and start dreaming again? The answer, like most things out here, is complicated. For you, the end of winter wasn't a date or a moment. It was a slow unravelling, a return to something softer, a day when you looked at your hands and they weren't shaking from cold, a night when you heard the owl hoot and didn't flinch because it wasn't the wind. Clara starts taking walks again, short ones at first. You watch her from the ridge as she moves slowly through the budding trees with the baby strapped to her chest, humming those strange lullabies like they're spells. She gathers wild ramps, spots the first dandelion, comes back smelling like sunlight and wet bark. You start leaving the door open during the day. Just a crack, enough for the breeze to come in, enough to air out the lingering scent of smoke and boiled onions. Inside the cabin, you move things around. Rearrange the chairs, sweep out the last of the ash, pull up the rug and beat it over the porch rail until it stops coughing dust. You hang the fiddle back on the wall. It's out of tune. You leave it that way. One evening, Clara hands you a tiny bundle. Your turn, she says. Inside, wrapped in scrap cloth, is a new shirt. Handmade, crooked stitching, sleeves a little long. You run your fingers over the seams, unable to speak. You don't know how she found the fabric. You don't ask. You just put it on. It fits. Clara looks at you for a long time, then says, "We made it." You nod. You did. Not just through the cold, but through everything it tried to take. Through hunger and silence, through frostbite and cracked beams, through boiled roots and worse. You kept the fire lit. You made music when there was no sound. You built when everything else was breaking. And now, there's this. A garden, a baby, a letter from someone who remembers your name, a shirt stitched by someone who saw all of you, tired, muddy, broken, and chose to make you something new. This is spring, not green and gold and sunshine, but repair, rebuilding, and maybe, just maybe, rest.